This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. We could, of course, do both, couldn't we? I forgot that when I was setting it up as a form of jeopardy or as a multiple choice challenge in that moment before the news. We could, of course, do both. But I don't know what would be more interesting, the misread headline or the actual headline. I turned the page of one newspaper this morning and read, "Sandals may wreck Rayner's leadership ambitions, say allies." And hand on heart, I thought that was plausible. I think so desperate are the attempts to smear Angela Rayner. I won't embarrass anybody by revealing identities, but I asked 3 producers working on popular programmes on LBC if they could explain to me in 2 sentences exactly what it is that the right-wing media are accusing Angela Rayner of having done with regards to her property arrangements, and not one of them could, including, perhaps, possibly, no comment from me, people working on programmes that are dedicated to pretending that Angela Rayner has done something absolutely awful. They couldn't actually explain what it was that she'd done. So if you said to me, they're going for her shoes now, they're saying that her sandals are, I don't know, common, or her sandals are not serious enough, her shoes, her footwear is an obstacle to her leadership ambitions, I don't know whether this says more about the right-wing media or me, but I would have believed you. I'd have said, yeah, that seems to me perfectly feasible. Angela Rayner's footwear has now become the latest salvo in attempts to undermine and smear her. But it wasn't. It was scandals. I mean, if there was a scandal involving her sandals, that would be a good headline, wouldn't it? Sandal scandal does for Rayner. But it's not. It is scandals may wreck Rayner's leadership ambitions, say allies. And we may turn our attention to a very simple question of what we think about the prospect of Angela Rayner becoming Prime Minister. I think the likelihood of Keir Starmer fighting the next election is very much in the balance as leader of the Labour Party. They're not as ruthless historically as the Tories, but if they think there's a better chance of winning with somebody else at the helm, then they will make that pretty clear in the coming years, months, but we shall see. We may return to that topic a little later in the programme, because I really do want to start with this. I've got no real problem with this. I blooming hate shoplifters. I used the B word, the other B word, the naughtier B word 3 times on the programme yesterday. People keep count of these matters, you know, and I shouldn't need to use that. It's a sign of a poor imagination, a limited vocabulary. So I will be saying blimmin' today, or possibly bloomin', depending on how discombobulated I am by events. I bloomin' hate shoplifters. It's something I get why that's cut through. I get why that failure to police it properly, it annoys so many so much. It annoys me enormously. I tend not to go for the most obvious target when I'm being invited to, and it seems that shops could spend more, big shops, not little shops. I've got nothing but sympathy for little shops, but big shops could spend a lot more of their profits on security, protecting not just their goods, but also their staff from the sort of scroats that are routinely filling up baskets and waltzing out of supermarkets unmolested. But it speaks to something, doesn't it, inside us, the idea that we are playing by the rules and they are not. Nothing annoys us more than the idea that we are playing by the rules and those people over there are not. Probably not going to talk about immigration today, because we talked about it a lot already this week, but the reason why right-wingers lie so much about what asylum seekers receive is to stoke those flames. So they need to create the idea that they're getting something you don't get. Nothing to stop you moving into a shared room with people you've never met before and living on £9 a week. If you want to, I could give you some guidance on that. I could probably find you somewhere you could get a bunk up for £9 a week, sharing a room with somebody you've never met before and don't even particularly like. That's fine. You can do it if you want to, but of course create the idea that they're getting something you haven't got. They're getting something unfair. Then you have, it's as old as the hills, that form of political provocation. And that is actually genuine in the case of shoplifters, because we almost all pay for our shopping. So they're thinking of bringing in facial recognition technology, and I am in that weird place again, where I find myself looking at something that feels a bit dystopian at first glance, feels a little bit dystopian, and I kind of like it. If you have got footage of somebody nicking stuff from your shop and you have the ability to spot them next time they come in, so you would identify them before they even get into the shop, why on earth would you not use it? And who on earth would argue that you shouldn't be able to answer privacy campaigners, for whom I generally have respect? But on this occasion, it's a question of whose rights trump whose. The shoplifter's right to privacy, is it? Or is it our right to privacy? Is it my right to privacy? Or the shoplifter's right to shoplift? Or the shopkeeper's right to protect his products? I don't know. I mention it only because the big story in the news today is the one about digital ID cards, which again seem to me to speak to two issues. The first is privacy, and the second is security. It was probably Voltaire who said that anyone prepared to sacrifice their liberty on the altar of security deserves neither. I'd say it was probably Voltaire. In fact, it's probably one of those quotes that nobody said, but Voltaire gets the credit for. That's usually how these things work, like the Einstein one about banging your head against the brick wall. But there's a truth in that, isn't there? If you have liberty and you're prepared to sacrifice your liberty for security today, will you regret it tomorrow? If it wasn't Voltaire, it was Benjamin Franklin. It's always one or the other. And here's a very little niche reference for you, possibly J.H. Plum. J.H. Plum. And if you get that cinematic reference, I'll give you the money myself. And the digital ID card has been suggested by Tony Blair, which will automatically inform some people's response to the proposal. He's not the first. He's not the first. There was a joke on Have I Got News for You many, many years ago that Paul Merton did. And I wonder, actually, whether he would do the same joke today. The world has changed. Things have changed. Paul Merton talking about the possibility of digital ID cards being introduced when David Blunkett was Home Secretary. David Blunkett, of course, is blind. And Paul Merton said on Have I Got News for You, and it was one of those jokes that made me fall off my chair. And he just said, can't we just tell him that we've done it? And I mean, it works on a bunch of levels. So I mention it only to illustrate the fact that there is nothing new about this, albeit that it's got Tony Blair's fingerprints on it in the current iteration. The Prime Minister reportedly looking at a bunch of options around the technology that could require all adults to show a digital ID when applying for a job, just to prove that they are in the UK legally. And I said we weren't going to talk about immigration a minute ago, and technically we're not. It is partly because President Macron has talked about the number of people apparently working here illegally, and drawn attention to an issue that Tony Blair had actually been talking about for quite a long time. One of the reasons that I voted, and if you're new to the programme, this may come as a little bit of a shock, one of the reasons why I voted for Boris Johnson to be Mayor of London about 100 years ago was that he promised an amnesty. He was suggesting an amnesty on people working here illegally, people in the black economy. And the idea was that you get people on the payroll, you normalise their status, they start paying taxes, the people exploiting them, robbing them blind. And part of the reason I did it is because on my way to work, before Greta Thunberg changed the world and my daughters insisted that I get public transport to work, I used to drive up King Street in Hammersmith in a stretch limousine every morning, and there would be a bunch of lads, I swear to you, this is only going back about 15 years, standing on a street corner waiting for tradesmen to pull up in a van and point at the ones that they wanted that were going to get a day's work that day. They were mostly Eastern European, I was told by locals, and almost certainly not paying taxes or having their labour put through the books. And the combination of the two things, the visible reality of what I was seeing every single morning and the proposal being made by Boris Johnson made me think, yeah, okay, that would work. And this would do it as well. I mean, they're not just sort of stopping people from working, but normalising tax paying and bringing it out to more people. If you're doing it to satisfy the racists, then as we established yesterday, it won't work. But if you're actually doing it because in the same way as shoplifting, it's almost like I planned this stuff. In the same way at shoplifting, there's a sense that these people are not playing by the rules. And I don't mean the people doing the work necessarily, I mean the people employing them. If we have a digital ID card that you have to produce every single time you apply for a job, then you're not going to be able to hire people who are not allowed to work. The employers are the villains here, tempting though it is to blame the employees, they are almost certainly being exploited. They are not having a good time of it. They are not the people who are not playing by the rules, except in the avoidance of tax. So you pay tax, you pay for your shopping. Therefore, you think more should be done to stop people from shoplifting and to stop people from not paying tax on their income. Just remember to get crosser with the employer than with the employee, but the question stands. Then you look at what's happening in the United States at the moment, which, I mean, maybe a separate phone-in. What day is it? Wednesday? All day? Okay. So we may later this week throw open the phone lines exclusively to people in the United States of America, because I don't think we're getting a fairly clear picture. I don't think we're getting a full picture in this country of just how mad everything has gone over there already. People being rounded up off the streets, people being refusing to leave their homes, businesses not able to open because the staff are terrified of turning up to work. The sort of quiet economy in America where people who hadn't actually normalised their immigration status but had been there for decades and were working and paying taxes is creaking under the pressure of Donald Trump's sort of populist provocations. And you wonder what role a digital ID card would play in that kind of scenario. If we ended up with a government who, I don't know, was going to start rounding up Capricorns or start rounding up people of a certain ethnicity or a certain religion. And, you know, people talk reasonably about the prospect of Farage getting into Downing Street, who here would say that there's no way he'd ever stoop that low. It's not, for the first time in my lifetime, for the first time in my living memory, it's not beyond the possibility that the United Kingdom could end up with a regime that really did treat people according to their origins and ethnicity very, very differently from how it would treat others. And how would a digital ID card prevent that? I don't know. And also, of course, as SJ asks, how would a digital ID card prevent a bloke that you met in the B&Q car park from paying you 50 quid for a day's work? I mean, it wouldn't solve the problem completely, but we probably shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Would it help with Windrush as well, probably? Or would it have actually contributed to the scandal of Windrush? Do you see what I mean? It's not as clear-cut or as black and white as you may originally have thought. 0345 60600973 is the number. You may want to sit down for the next bit. The excitement could be uncontainable. PMQs is back today. The politicians have returned from recess. Keir Starmer will be facing Kemi Badenoch at 12 noon today, and we will be, as ever, taking it live. I'm also going to do a little more on the story about Kemi Badenoch's increasingly curious claim that she was offered a scholarship to Stanford University in the United States of America when she was 16 years old, something that various head of admissions at Stanford University in the United States of America have told the Guardian newspaper is completely impossible. We'll be speaking to the journalist who's broken that story and getting an update on where it is going. But let's begin with this, all right? 2 questions. The first is, what exactly is the privacy argument here? Why should I be worried about a digital ID card? And I'll take anything you've got on this. I talk about pendulum topics sometimes. I talk about subjects where I don't have very, very strong opinions. I don't have deep understanding. And sometimes, do you know the words I thought about a lot on holiday? Thoughtful but uncertain. We live increasingly in a world where you're not allowed to be thoughtful and uncertain. You have to have sort of really strong views, really strong opinions. I was looking at the mad coverage of the arrest of the comedy writer Graham Linehan this morning for some tweets that he'd posted. And I found myself thinking, I don't think anybody should ever encourage anybody to assault anybody. But this seems incredibly excessive that this fella has been arrested for it. And that was it. That was the end of my insight. That was the end of my interest in the story. I turned to one newspaper this morning. It's got about 5 pages on the subject. There'll be an unhinged headline later today showing you just how bonkers some of the coverage of that story is. So you can just say, well, that's not a very nice thing to do, but I don't think it's an arrestable offence. Next question, please. Thoughtful and uncertain. I'd like a little bit more thoughtful and uncertain, but not from you. I'll do thoughtful and uncertain. You will do thoughtful and certain. And the first thing you'll do today is tell me that, or why, the digital ID card scheme for every single person in the country, initially and ostensibly designed to prevent people who have no right to be here from applying for jobs has privacy ramifications. Okay, question number one. Well, what are those privacy ramifications? Why should we be worried? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Tell me why I should be worried. Question number one. Question number two, obviously, is why shouldn't I? Why should we welcome this? Why is it actually a good idea? What on earth is the problem with something that has an air of inevitable technological advance to it? And the third one, which I haven't actually asked you before, will it work? So that simple proposition there, everyone in the UK will be forced to have a digital ID card that you will have to produce when you apply for a job. I don't know enough about this economy. I have no idea whether or not the practice is widespread enough to justify the introduction, and whether or not the introduction would actually curtail the practice. But you may. So 3 questions. What is the privacy? What should we be worried about with regards to digital ID cards? Because right now, I'm not remotely worried. 0345 6060 973. Why do you like them? Why do you welcome them? And then crucially, whichever side of that debate you're on, do you think that this will actually work as a way of preventing people who have no right to be here from getting jobs? Will this actually work, or will the kind of employers who are prepared to hire that kind of employee just continue to swerve the rules entirely? 0345 6060 973. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. In fact, if you're quick, you could even be first.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 10 is the time. What is the single biggest thing that we should all be worried about? If the government, as seems likely, is poised to introduce digital ID cards, ostensibly as yet another brick in the wall of anti-immigrant policy making and anti-immigration rhetoric, what should the rest of us be worried about? What are the things that people who are here legally and have every right to apply for jobs, what are we likely to lose, or what should we be frightened of? And I am up for grabs on this. It is perfectly feasible that by 11 o'clock today, or even by 10:30, I will be passionately opposed. In fact, I'd quite like to be passionately opposed to ID cards. I'd like to be passionately opposed to something. There's not enough passion in our lives. But right now, I'm not a little bit meh. I'm actually broadly warm towards the whole idea. Barbara's in York. Barbara, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello, James.
Hello,
nice
Barbara.
Well, I'm not worried in the least. In fact, at the moment, I'm so annoyed and frustrated. I wish we already had them.
Could you try again? Can you try and get frightened? I want people who are frightened by the prospect, Barbara, more than I want people who aren't in the first instance. Could you not? Can you conjure up some fear?
Yes, I will. I'll get really scared.
What of?
I've no idea.
That's the spirit. Why would you welcome them so warmly? What is the thing, the hole in your life that you think that they would fill?
Well, I've just, in the last few weeks, recently had to prove my identity twice for a volunteering activity that I do.
Oh.
So I've had to do a DBS check. So I've had to get loads of documents out and actually do an online thing, and then take them to somebody who is there, the designated person for checking them, who has to check them.
The checker, I think he's called.
The checker, that's
Yes.
it. So I had to take it to speak to her. So we had to arrange a time when we could both meet.
This is someone from the charity, is it?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So obviously they've been sort of proved as being capable of doing this.
How easy would it be to get a job? I appreciate you're volunteering, not doing paid work, but how easy would it be to who are the people who are getting the jobs that you don't need to prove your identity for? Because it seems unlikely to me that the kind of character currently minded to hire them is going to stop being minded to hire them when digital ID cards become a thing.
Well, exactly. And then the other thing was you now have to prove your identity for Company's House if you're a company director, and of course a lot of charities are a company as well. And you have to do that. You have to put an app on your phone and then link it with the government website. And, of course, with mine, it didn't work. So I've had two-hour sessions on the online chat with the government as to trying to get it work, and it still hasn't worked. So I'm a little bit
I'm looking, no offence, Barbara, I'm delighted by your call, but I am obviously looking for sort of Orwellian dystopias to be painted by my callers this morning, and Minority Report fictions becoming fact and reality. But you've reminded us of one of the great truths of modern life, which is they'll probably mess it up, or it will be incredibly difficult to actually navigate. It'll be like buying a train ticket. It'll be, there'll be 10, 11, 12 different things going on different websites, and you won't be able to know where you're supposed to be or what you're supposed to be doing. In conclusion, have you successfully established who you are?
I have for my DBS, but not for Company's House.
Good Lord. Well, there you go. I mean, I hadn't thought of that, and I'm only being mildly facetious when I say I want Orwellian dystopias rather than mild discomfort. But she's right, isn't she? I mean, how much faith? What was the last massive... Okay, here's a question. The last entirely successful would be the vaccines? Would it be the vaccine rollout? The last... Yeah, I think it would, wouldn't it? The last, truly successful, government-led... nationwide initiative that was not ambushed by either red tape, scleroticism or incompetence. I think it would be the vaccine rollout, actually. That actually is quite uplifting. Maybe we're not as celebratory as we should be about that. Thank you, Barbara. From York to the Canary Islands, where Steve resides, or is possibly on holiday. Steve, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Good morning, everybody.
Can we be a bit more specific, Steve? I don't mean when you said everybody. I don't want you to name all 1.4 million people. Which Canary Island is what I mean?
I'm on Fuerteventura. And I live here. I'm not on holiday.
You lucky man. Carry on. What made you pick up the phone?
Hence me calling.
Yes.
So, as a foreign national, right, in Spain, I'm issued with an ID card, a foreigner's ID card that has my photo. It has my biometrics in the form of fingerprints. It gets renewed every 10 years if I am an official resident. Otherwise, if I'm temporary, it's only 5 years. And it has to be, I have to use it. I'm legally obliged to carry it with me at all times and can be fined if I don't have it. And it's used to identify myself absolutely everywhere. I mean, if I go into a government office, they want to know my ID number and they want to see my card. If I want to hire a car, if I go to a GP surgery, anytime I interact with any business or anything, if I'm renting a house, if I'm getting a job, I pay for it, but it only costs me £10.
And do Spaniards have an equivalent?
Yes, they do. So they have their national ID card, which has exactly... Obviously, it looks different, but they use it in exactly the same way. And it's absolutely amazing, because I carry one card. If I'm stopped by the police in the car, I show them my card. They check my validity. They check that I'm not wanted. They check that I own a car, that I own the car. They check that I have insurance. Absolutely everything. My biggest fear...
Go on.
My biggest fear in the UK is that, and I've worked with a number of governments in my field, which is education. However, they have yet ever to implement an IT system, not as complex, but as wide-ranging as this. The closest would be sort of linking up all of our NHS together, and they can't even get that right.
Well, we had the COVID thing on our phones, didn't we? Do you remember? To prove you'd had a jab.
It wasn't used as sort of a national ID card where you needed it to show everybody whenever you wanted to interact with a business.
But I agree with you. It popped up while Barbara was talking, that thought in my head as well. But I don't know that we can... I don't want to be that bloke who says, oh, there's no point doing it because we'll only mess it up. That's not a reason. Otherwise, we'd never do anything, would we, ever?
Oh, no, I really think we should do it.
And this would be better than what you're describing, because this would be digital. You wouldn't need to be carrying around a little piece of plastic or a little piece of paper.
Yeah, and to be honest, I also have a digital version of it.
Yes, so I thought you might.
On my phone, just in case, and the digital one does exactly the same. But I don't think the government seems to learn from other countries, because if they'd have looked at Germany, if they'd have looked at Spain, if they'd have looked at France, they'd have seen all the benefits and they'd have seen how they could do it. And I don't understand why they don't look outside our own borders
and see what works. So there may be answers to that question. And the official line, and I'll read it to you, is that it was the previous Labour government attempted to introduce national ID cards, but it was scrapped after significant opposition due to concerns about civil liberties and bureaucracy. Now, we've all gone down the bureaucracy road so far, you, me and Barbara, but what are the civil liberties concerns? I can't pin them down.
I think the civil liberties is actually the opposite. I use it far more. I know far more over here that I am safe carrying one.
That's a good way of thinking about it.
Because I know that everybody else is carrying one. And more importantly, you're legally obliged to carry one. So if you get stopped by the police and you don't have it, they don't know who you are. So they take you away.
Oh, yes. You can immediately prove who you are.
Exactly.
Final question. Why am I thinking about Gordon Jackson?
Why are you thinking of Gordon Jackson?
Is there an echo in here?
I have no. only on my side. I have no idea. Why are you thinking of Gordon Jackson?
Right, I'll leave that hanging as we head towards the news. But actually, I said final question. Do you ever go to Gran Canaria on your travels, or do you mostly stay in Fuerteventura?
Listen, I know this is going to sound awful for people, but yes, I do. And because when you live on the Canaries, you get 75% discount on travel to anywhere else.
It doesn't sound awful. That sounds lovely. Stay on the line, and Elliot will tell you the name of the delicatessen that one of my oldest friends owns in Las Palmas, all right?
Oh, and I'll go there when I'm next over.
Right, that's what I want you to do. Get yourself down there and get a lovely dish of paella or so. He does some lovely stuff in there. He's a lovely bloke. Ask for him by name. Elliot will give you the details. Well, Dominic Ellis brings you the news headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10:34. I know what you're thinking. It's my job to know this stuff, but I don't. What are the civil liberties arguments? I remember once talking to somebody who was explaining what the civil liberties problems are, and halfway through the interview I realised it was one of those secretly funded Tufton Street outfits, so I couldn't continue the interview. It was all very embarrassing. But I can't really remember. What are we supposed to be worried about with regard to digital ID cards? And then also the question that's grown in stature since we came on air this morning is, will it actually work? Will this prevent people here without permissions, people here illegally, or people having their applications for asylum processed from taking up paid work? I'd do it the other way round. I wish they could work. It would solve all sorts of problems. I was looking at some birth rate statistics earlier this week, and it's chilling. We may talk about that later in the programme, or indeed later this week. Now, 2 bits of homework I've given you today, and they break up quite amusingly. The Gordon Jackson question is one that I've asked before. I don't know why. I just think of that scene in The Great Escape where they're asked for their papers, and Donald Pleasance has done such a bang-up job of creating fake papers that they're about to get away with it and get on the train to escape from Germany, having broken out of the prison camp. And the clever German guard at the railway station says to Gordon Jackson something like, "Have a nice day," in English, and he replies, "Thank you very much." And that's it. He's done. He's shot. He's dead. It's over. So that's why I think of Gordon Jackson when we're talking about digital ID cards or ID cards. And lots of you got that right. Some of you are actually quite rude in pointing out that I do draw this parallel every time I talk about ID cards. Only one person, as far as I can tell, got the correct answer to my J.H. Plum question at the top of the programme today, which is what does that come from? And David in Southend is the happy winner of no prize at all for pointing out that it is a reference to my favourite film of all time, If, directed by Lindsay Anderson and starring Malcolm McDowell. And there's a brilliant scene in it where the teacher reads a quote out and says, "Who said that?" And McDowell's character goes, "Plum. J.H. Plum." And the teacher goes, very possibly. And obviously the joke is that even the teacher didn't know the answer to the question when he asked it, but he wasn't expecting anyone to have a crack at answering except this rather precocious hero of the movie. So, well played. Well played, David, in Southend. It's not a spoiler, you sausage. It's just a little scene from a film. There's nothing to stop you watching it, Adam. 10:37 is the time. Back to ID cards and what we should be worried about. Michael's in Brentwood. Michael, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Mike.
There's a couple of things. On the civil liberties thing, the guy gave you civil liberties examples straight away. He said you have to carry them. You can be ordered to show them.
Yeah.
I don't have to carry ID. I don't have to carry a driving licence when I'm driving. And everything he can do with his ID card, you can do with your passport, which 86% of people in this country have.
Yeah.
And so no policeman can come up to me without reason. He has to suspect I've committed a crime for me to ID myself. With an ID card, he can, because he has an excuse. We're checking you've got one.
Well, listen, they're not. Yeah, you're right. And I think you've actually answered another question unintentionally that's really helpful as well, because the point here is that you'll only have to produce it when you're applying for a job. But you can immediately respond to that by saying, well, for now. I mean, there's no way it's going to end there. But the other bit that I think you've answered is the fellow in Fuerteventura's point about why we're not following the way other European countries have gone. And the answer is that we police by consent in this country. And in other countries, including European countries, they don't. It's a different relationship between the public and the police. And you're right, actually. There is a sort of presumption of innocence until proven guilty that is fractured slightly if we give the police the right to demand that we prove who we are whenever they feel like it.
Yeah, and I think what goes alongside that is the general incompetency of government, and I mean government of any colour. We've only just had the Afghanistan fiasco. And what information is going to be kept? How is it going to be kept? When will it be?
No, I'll give you get a gold star for your first point, but you get a whack for your second one, because they're not going to have anything on the record that is classified. The Afghanistan leak was people who could be killed by the Taliban.
If they've got your name and address, you can open up bank accounts. If people can break into that information, which doesn't seem ultra secure, James, that's my problem with it. It's not the first.
You mean like identity theft?
Yes, because
I think it might be the other way round. This might be a guard against identity theft, because you've got to produce the actual digital ID in order to do this, not just the name and address, the actual digital ID.
And if you can break into the system and you get the digital ID code, you can enter it into other systems.
Oh, you're a right old pessimist, aren't you?
I mean, that's a smaller point. But the last thing I would say is all these things are okay when you have a reasonable government in. But I'm speaking to a lot of people I thought were normal who are now talking about voting in a way I would think is extreme.
Well, for the fellow that's going to send people back to the Taliban, perhaps, you might be referring to. So yeah,
I don't want him having all the information he can on everybody here.
But it would be your name and your right to reside here. That's all it would be.
Right now.
Yeah.
To begin with. What else goes on there as time goes on? Nothing stays as it is.
You're tickling my pendulum, Michael. It's 10:40. And Emma takes up the point. They write, it won't stop at checking employment or immigration status. Various governments have finally realised the value of Cambridge Analytica Doge-style data harvesting of their citizens. A digital ID makes turning us into data points exponentially easier. It was Fruit Loop territory 20 years ago, worrying that Tesco were tracking your purchase of eggs. I think I remember that phone-in. But I don't want a government system with today's analytic technology spreading out to every civil service under the sun. To which, I think, as with Michael, I would ask, why not? Give me more detail, rather than sort of vague misgivings. What would they do with this information that we should be fearful of? I buy the fear, the idea, the suggestion that it won't stop with checking employment status or right to be here. I find it feasible that it could expand, but I still need to know what exactly I should be worried about. And indeed, it was fears about civil liberties and bureaucracy that did for it last time round when David Blunkett was Home Secretary. 10:41 is the time. The phone lines are open and Joshua is in Windsor. Joshua, what would you like to say?
Hi there, how are you doing?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
So I'm just listening to everyone else this morning, and I recently changed job, and I had to jump through a lot of hoops to prove that I was who I said I was and had a right to live in the UK.
Were you joining the circus?
No, definitely not flexible enough for that.
Oh, you mean metaphorical hoops? Forgive me.
Metaphorical hoops, yeah, bureaucratic hoops. So jumped through a lot of hoops in order to prove who I was. You know, I've had a name change in the past, so I had to send off, you know, birth certificate, name change documents, proof of address, marriage certificate, the whole lot. My entire life in paperwork. Yeah. And I am still against the idea of a digital ID. I cannot see how it would improve the process in any way. The issue I had was that I don't have a valid passport. I have no intention of going abroad anytime soon, so I see no point in spending the ridiculous amount of money it costs to...
It's actually quite good value, but I take your point. I mean, if you think about it, but I take your point.
I can see the argument for having
but not
it,
if you're not going away. It's an absolute waste of cash.
Having had the issues I had,
yes,
I would say, actually, if I'd had one, I wouldn't have had to jump through any hoops, because it would have just been a case of
but this isn't...
the passport.
So, I mean... go on, sorry, carry on.
So what I was going to say is your last caller touched on my concern, which is it being integrated into other things. So I drive for a living. I'm out and about all the time. Yeah. So let's say at the moment, yes, we're just using it for ID, no problem. But when you start doing things like tracking spending and the emphasis we've got at the moment on, you know, environmental impact of people and their daily lives, what happens when, you know, I've spent a week driving, I've done, you know, 900 miles in a week, I go to fill up my car at the weekend and it turns around and says, unfortunately, you've used up your credit for doing, you know, buying fuel this week. Sorry, you can't have any.
You sound a tiny bit mad now. I say that with great affection. Did you see?
I can see how far it would go, because how often have we had things?
But if they're going to introduce rationing of fuel, they don't need a digital ID card to do it.
We're not rationing of fuel. But,
what is it then?
Like what do they call it at the moment? It's sort of like a carbon credit type scheme.
Yeah.
You know,
that would be a rationing of fuel. So you're worried in the future they might say you can only use a certain amount of fuel. They don't need a digital ID card to enforce that, do they? You just have to produce something every time you buy fuel. You already do. I mean, if they wanted to do that, they could just track your number plate or your credit card.
I agree completely, but the issue I've got is how easy it would be to do if you sent...
This is two callers on the trot now that have gone from brilliant to bonkers in the space of about 30 seconds. It must be something about this subject.
Okay, so if let's say, so you centralise your ID system, so you remove the need for a driving licence, a passport, all of that stuff. Yeah. And you focus entirely on a digital ID. You then go, okay, so now that we've got your digital ID, your money's already digital anyway, how about we integrate a banking system into your digital ID? So you've still got bank accounts with 2 or 3 different banks, not a problem, you can still access them in the normal way. But instead of having 2 or 3 different cards, even on your phone, you know, you scroll through the different cards or in your wallet, they're all attached to your ID. So now, not only do you have a government that's got full control over your money, where, you know, the only real benefit of having a digital banking system is that you can switch the money off when you want to.
I can think of a few more benefits to a digital banking system.
Okay, there are.
It'd be hard to buy a house with pound coins.
Okay, fair enough. I can see, you know, that argument, but I don't know. It concerns me.
But you're fighting the things that, okay. So you've got no particular objection to the scheme as it is set out. But
if someone said you can have a physical ID card, we will remove the need for you to have a driving licence and a passport. We will give you a state-issued ID card.
Yeah.
Absolutely, no problem at all. I don't mind having the...
But you don't like the idea of it being digital?
I don't like the idea of it being digital. How often have we seen NHS systems, for example, go down because there's been a hacking attempt?
Yeah, but the general existence of the NHS ID is a positive thing. It makes life infinitely easier. It means that doctors at one end of the country can find out what happened to you at the other end of the country at the flick of a button.
I've got no problem with the NHS having a system...
It's gone a bit tinfoil hat. Can I ask a question that you do not have to answer?
Yeah, go for it.
And it may be pertinent to this conversation, or it may have nothing to do with it whatsoever. Why did you change your name?
My mother remarried.
Oh, okay. Thank goodness for that. I thought it might have a kind of, I don't know, a civil liberty ramification, because I want to get off the matrix or something like that. I don't want them to know where I am. Thank you, Joshua. You raised some interesting points, and I say it affectionately, some ones that to me sounded at least slightly bonkers, but not as bonkers as claiming that you'd want a place at a scholarship, no less, at Stanford University, when nobody at Stanford University thinks A, that it ever happened, or B, that it ever could have happened, because because of where you were and what you were at the time of the alleged offer. More on that story, which involves a prominent politician, but a story you possibly haven't heard a great deal about this week because it doesn't involve Angela Rayner. After this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10 to 11. And the long list of things that I wang on about every day and never actually come to any meaningful conclusions about, the dominance of right-wing narratives in public discourse is probably the biggest, isn't it? I mean, almost every subject we discuss in some sense falls at that hurdle, the hurdle of the public not getting a clear picture of things because our media is so bent. So horribly biased towards the right wing. How else do you get things like austerity, Brexit, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Nigel Farage? How do any of these things flourish and thrive in a country full of intelligent people unless the access to information is being controlled by hideously biased individuals and institutions? I just those four things, really. Austerity, Brexit, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, and then a side order of Nigel Farage, who, of course, cheered all four of them along. How do these people keep their jobs? How do they not get held accountable for the disasters that they've inflicted on the country? Well, for the same reason that all the journalists that tickled their toes and cheered them to the rafters do. And it's Angela Rayner's turn this week to come in for a kicking for undisclosed reasons, or rather disclosed but hardly very serious reasons. And what I find interesting about that is they're now claiming that her leadership ambitions could be affected by the scandals that reportedly plague her. It's a perfect circle, that. So I'm going to massively exaggerate and embellish some behaviour by a politician, and then a year later I'm going to claim that the reporting of embellished and massively exaggerated behaviour could actually damage someone's leadership ambitions. It makes me all the more interested in why they're so scared of Angela Rayner. Nobody seems to be scared of Kemi Badenoch, which may explain, least of all the Labour Party, which may explain why a rather splendid story by Jessica Elgot, the deputy political editor of The Guardian, has been picked up with rather less enthusiasm by her colleagues on Fleet Street and in the broadcast media than these various stories about Angela Rayner's house, or indeed her fondness of a vape or a glass of wine. But to my eye, and I'm as guilty potentially of footballification as anybody else, but to my eye this is a rather bigger story because it potentially involves a rather graver offence, particularly for somebody, and this is the crucial point, particularly for somebody who has made great hay out of telling other politicians to come clean about things up to and including Rachel Reeves's CV. And Jessica Elgot joins me now. Even I knew, and I haven't followed her career with great enthusiasm, Jessica, that Kemi Badenoch had been offered a place, indeed a scholarship, at Stanford University to study medicine when she was a mere stripling of 16 years old. I don't think I knew that she claimed she couldn't pursue it, or she couldn't follow her medical dreams later in life because the college that she went to when John Major was Prime Minister was so rubbish. But we may get on to that. You've been looking into the original claim.
Yeah, so Kemi Badenoch's made this claim. I think it's in 4 places that I've found it written up, which is that she received an offer for a partial scholarship, is what she described it as, when she was 16, on the basis of her SAT results. Those are the kind of US standardised tests that US students take to get into university, which she took at 16, which is very early, prodigiously early. And that she got in for medicine, or she sometimes describes it as pre-med. In the US, medicine is by and large a graduate degree, so you can't do it unless you've already got an undergraduate degree. And there are some universities that offer something called pre-med, sort of a combination of an undergraduate degree in science, but Stanford isn't one of them. So that's the first thing that kind of piqued my interest in this story of hers.
So she was offered a place on a course that doesn't exist.
Right. Yeah. But even if you were to kind of give her the benefit of the doubt and say, well, maybe it's a colloquialism that if you wanted to pursue medicine and we're going to do sort of science undergrad, maybe that's how you might describe it to a UK audience. When I started talking to admission staff about it, they said they just don't offer partial scholarships to international students because they know they can't afford the very high fees by and large, so they only ever offer a few full scholarships, or at least they did during that era. And I in fact found the admissions officer who was in charge of international admissions and scholarships for international students during the time that Kemi Badenoch applied. And he remembers that he didn't admit her. In fact, he says he knows he didn't admit her because these students who were applying from Africa at the time, and Kemi Badenoch was living in Nigeria, he only admitted during at that time students from South Africa and Kenya. Those are the only ones who got the scholarships. And he also remembered that he didn't, barely admitted any women. So, it might seem to some of your listeners, well, how can this admission officer remember everyone? But because of those facts, he just knows that he didn't.
It's a trident of memory, isn't it? It's a three-pronged memory, because he would never have offered anybody a place on test scores alone. He'd never offered a partial scholarship, and he hadn't offered anything to anybody in Nigeria.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. They have insisted that not only did Kemi Badenoch get an offer from Stanford on the basis of SATs alone, something that lots of admissions officers, and I'm speaking to a vice provost of Ivy League universities, say just isn't, that's not possible. That just never happens, not even for royalty or kind of internationally renowned child prodigies. And they say not only she'd get, but she got it from lots of universities, the Conservatives claim, but including ones in the UK, which then again, it makes it quite strange to understand that she then went to a South London sixth form college and did A-levels. If she'd already received offers at 16, none of this, makes a huge amount of sense.
No, it doesn't. And obviously, she famously never commits gaffes or misspeaks, and therefore never has to apologise for anything. But how has she responded, or how have her people responded to your revelations, to your report?
I mean, they just insist that it did happen, despite lots of very eminent people saying that the scenario she describes is impossible, which they don't have the. I'm not expecting her to produce actually the offer on paper from 30 years ago. I mean, I think that would be ludicrous. But I don't. It's very hard to understand why, in the face of this, they would just insist that she is the only. Saying
it's all true. We've got the offer. It just goes to a different school. Ironically enough. I don't want to tempt you into territory you're not comfortable in, Jessica, because obviously you have friends and colleagues in the lobby working for other papers. But if this was Angela Rayner, it would probably be on more front pages than The Guardian's.
Well, look, I can understand also that, perhaps people think that Kemi Badenoch's future as leader of the Conservative Party is not necessarily going to be a particularly long one, and so I can understand, if that, the Deputy Prime Minister is potentially a bigger target, and there may well be sort of merit in what colleagues are investigating about Angela Rayner. I think particularly we at The Guardian would write about both of them without fear or favour, but I think that. Of course, and I also do understand that sometimes, when you've got exclusives, when you've got interviews with so many people, and it did take me about a week to speak to everyone I needed to, that it's harder to then follow those up. But yes, of course, I mean, if she's lied about something as intrinsic as her early education, it is actually significant, even if her leadership of the Conservative Party isn't long for this world. But do we know what happens next? Keir Starmer's not the kind of politician that's likely to bring this up later today at PMQs, is he? It's not. I think that's. I don't know. I mean, I don't know about. I'm sure that the other political parties will want to keep bringing us up. But I think the main thing is what does it mean for the Conservative Party? There is obviously a lot of doubt about Kemi Badenoch's leadership amongst lots of Conservative MPs and lots of people in the cabinet, and loads of those people won't speak, on the record. But I received a lot of texts from a lot of Conservatives after that story broke.
Interesting.
I don't think her version of events is ringing true with them.
No, I mean, it's hard to see how it could. I do have one bone to pick with you, Jessica. Alex has been in touch. He wants to know that if it was impossible for Kemi Badenoch to get an offer like this at that age, then how do you account for the career of Doogie Howser, MD?
Yeah, no, perhaps she's got confused with that story. I'm joking.
I know you are. Thank you very much. We will not be turning away from this story, keeping an eye on it and keeping in touch with you, Jessica. Congratulations on such an interesting story. And she used a lovely phrase, didn't she? Was it a prodigious talent or a child prodigy, an academic child prodigy? So I should add, for context, that Kemi Badenoch went on to achieve a B in biology, a B in chemistry and a D in maths, something that she has blamed on her teachers at her college, which is a healthy bit of advice on A-level results day. If things don't go as well as you hope, lads, blame it all on your teachers. Take no responsibility for it whatsoever yourself, and insist that you never commit gaffes. And you did get an offer from Stanford University, despite Stanford University never having issued such an offer when you were 16, and anyone who says otherwise is a big fat smelly liar. There you go, that's politics.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I have a corker of an unhinged headline for you today, but I also have a little bit of housework to do. I want to issue a couple of apologies. One, to someone whose name I can't remember, who was very cross with me yesterday. It may have been Ian. Not that one, another one. He was very cross with me yesterday for not pointing out that the number of crossings in small boats of the English Channel was lower in August than it was in any other August since, I think, 2019. And I had pointed that out, but I then added that there were more people on each boat coming, so it wasn't quite the claim that he made. It turns out I was actually wrong. I read this morning that not only have there been no crossings at all for almost a week, but that the lowest numbers in total since 2021 crossed in August. I leave you to wonder why the people who are constantly banging on about small boats haven't told you that the crossings have apparently ceased completely. It'd be something to do with the weather, it always is. But if it is really, really important to know when it is happening, how can it not be important to know when it isn't? And of course, the other totals as well. 4 minutes after, I think he was called Nick, not Ian, that texter. So apologies to him. And then apologies to you, because I think I might have dropped a bit of a clanger historically. I'm fascinated by birth rates, as you know. Isn't it funny? I said to you at 10 o'clock this morning we weren't going to talk about immigration today, and then both of the subjects I've got, digital ID cards and birth rates, immediately open the door to comments about immigration. One of the reasons why the new leader of the Green Party is absolutely right when he reminds us how important immigration is demographic decline. The fact that we are having fewer children. Would you believe me if I told you that they have just shut 750 schools in Greece because they haven't got enough kids? Well, you would, because it'd be a weird thing to make up, right? But they have suspended 750 schools in Greece, about 5% of all the schools in Greece, because they haven't got enough children to fill the school. And that is down to declining birth rates, which is a really arresting statistic, isn't it? And Greece being, a relatively nearby European country, this is in the Financial Times, so it must be true. Greece suspends 5% of schools, literally of schools, as birth rate drops. And if you were to look up that story, so you'd type in something like birth rates Greece or birth rates news, then you would notice on your search engine that you also have questions like, why is the global birth rate declining? Why we're not having kids anymore? Falling birth rates, a turning point for public services, asked the local government association a couple of years ago. And it reminded me of a superb piece that I'd read also in the Financial Times at the end of last week, at the end of last month even, about the falling birth rate. It's by one of the journalists who is, he should be anointed as a national treasure. He's the sort of statistics guy at the Financial Times. He's called John Byrne Murdoch with a hyphen, and I don't think I've ever seen his byline on a story that I didn't find fascinating. It just takes you to places with facts, evidence, statistics that you would not get taken to by almost anybody else in the business. And he turned his attention last week, on the 29th of August, to the news that the UK birth rate had fallen to a record low. Did you know this? Hand on heart, did you know this? I was on holiday, so I didn't tell you. A record low. So you're turning on your radio in the morning or logging onto your news websites, and you're being shouted at a very, very high volume about how awful it is that people are coming here, but the same people who are shouting at you about that aren't telling you that we are now at a record low when it comes to the birth rate in the UK. And that sees us join the United States, France, Italy, and dozens of other countries. So this is I like this phrase, a global phenomenon. A global phenomenon. And it is now being noticed by people who hadn't previously been particularly exercised by it. So very right-wing people used to care about the falling birth rate among people like them because they were worried that it would lead to an increase in people not like them. So you would end up, if you were a white supremacist, you'd be very worried about being outnumbered by people who weren't white. So birth rate, demographic obsession has long been more interesting to the right-wing / racist outlook than it has been to everybody else. But of course it matters to everyone, if the birth rate is falling, because the economic impact is absolutely enormous, which is why central bankers are now joining in. Christine Lagarde, Andrew Bailey, Kazuo Ueda, all last week describing the deleterious economic impact of ageing populations. There's not really any silver lining to an ageing population. And as John Byrne Murdoch pointed out, and it really resonated with me, this piece, the left are still steering clear of this. It feels like an inherently conservative concern, because wanting people to have more children can imply reversing women's lib. You know, the idea that women exist solely to produce spawn is popular among a certain kind of politics, and it is anathema to another kind of politics, but it's not valid anymore. It doesn't quite work in the modern context. A constraint of individual freedom and a setting back of women's progress might explain why some people are really, really concerned about falling birth rates. Then you've got the environment. More humans means more emissions on an already sweating planet. So, you know, there are reasons why some people are interested in this, but they are not the same reasons why you should be, necessarily. And quite bizarrely, the birth rate among people who identify as progressive, so people who don't like to blame all their problems on foreigners, are slower. It's falling faster. The birth rates are lower among people who identify as progressive. There's a lot going on here, but what is most significant, to me at least, is that it's global. It's not in any sense unique to these islands, to this country. And the reason why I owe you an apology is actually one of those things that when I tell you, you'll go, crikey. Hopefully you'll go, God, yeah, of course, I made that mistake as well. But now you come to mention it, it's completely obvious. I've always confined phone-ins in this area to people who have decided not to have children. There's two big generational differences between anybody my age and older and anybody 10 years younger and younger. If you're aged between 43 and 53, 45, 45, I don't know where you fit into these two things. But the big, big differences, for me at least, are property ownership and parenthood. Things that were an absolute presumption to me. Things that for my generation, and you didn't even have to be middle class for this, you just were raised in a way that meant two things were expected. You expected, and don't at me to say that you weren't, because this is a generalisation. It's not going to fit everybody, but it is going to fit the generalised population. You would expect to become a parent. And you would expect to own a property. I know that lots of people rented, but this is statistically sound. And you are now less likely to own a property than your parents were. And you are less likely to become a parent than your parents were. It's a huge, huge demographic change. We don't talk about it enough because it's hard to make it sexy, you know? But the problem I identified yesterday, the mistake I've made in the past, is confining this conversation to people who haven't had any children at all. People who have decided not to have any children at all. The real driver, the more you dig into these statistics, the real driver here is people having fewer children than they would otherwise or have wanted. People who have, in the course of sort of adolescence and early adulthood, recalibrated their parental ambitions and decided, for example, only to have one. Because if two parents only have one child, then obviously the birth rate falls. Obviously the population shrinks. It should be 2 for 2. But if it's 2 for 1, and if every couple, and for example, if you are only allowed to have a child with one person, you were never allowed to get divorced in a sort of mythical future universe, then the population would halve almost overnight if every couple was only allowed to have one child. So what I want to know from you is why you have made that decision to have fewer children than your parents. Not to have no children, but to have fewer. 0345 6060 973. And it's not an entirely new phenomenon, of course, but a record low is new. When you break a record, that's news. And for the UK birth rate to have fallen to a record low, alongside the United States, France, Italy, and dozens of other countries, is profoundly significant. You could celebrate. William is celebrating. He says, are you mad? No silver lining? The environment, mate. You know, the most important thing to everyone alive. I did touch on that. I think your text must have landed before I mentioned emissions and before I mentioned the environment. So, of course, I take your point. But I don't think that's going to be one of the big drivers for why people are only having one child, or people who were expecting to have four. You grew up in a huge family, you always thought you were going to want a huge family, and you've decided not to have a huge family. So there's two ways into this. The first way into it is obviously the very personal. And I want the real reasons, the actual reasons, the calculations, because it's such a weird... To my generation, it's such a weird calculation to have made. It may well be that you haven't had any children at all and you're not going to, but I don't want to exclude people who've only had one child. Or, see, why am I using the word only? As if it's somehow a negative. Oh, we've only got one. Two children being roughly the average. It's 2.4, isn't it? Historically, isn't that the average thing? That's why the sitcom was called 2.4 Children. I loved that show. Do you know that the lad in that who died young, didn't he? Was it Gary Olsen? He bought the stage rights to Reservoir Dogs. I'd love to have seen that if he hadn't died young. Putting on a stage version of Reservoir Dogs would have been absolutely fascinating. But anyway, I digress quite violently, actually, even by my standards. I want the actual calculation. So you do a pros and cons almost, don't you? You get together with someone, and the next stage of the relationship, historically, traditionally, is to have children. And if you were raised in that world, as I was, and particularly, and this is something that popped up last time we touched on this subject, because Mrs. O'Brien and I struggled to have children, because we had fertility treatment, I experienced feelings that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy, the feelings of horror and loss and almost grief at thinking it was never going to happen. It makes it hard for me to understand rationally and calmly deciding that actually you don't want two children, or you don't want any children at all. You're doing a calculation and you are deciding that it's not for you. And I want you to tell me why. So that is the personal. The personal reasons, 0345 6060 973. And then I want the political or the global answer to the question. So you don't need to be in the catchment area. You don't need to be in the zone of this story. But you can answer these two questions from the perspective of being outside it. The first one is fairly easy to answer, I hope. The second one, I've got no idea what you're going to say. So the first one is, why do you think this is happening? So I'm not talking about you, but I am talking about your planet. I'm talking about your species, and today, at least, I'm talking about your country. Why do you think the UK birth rate is at a record low? Okay? And the second bit, what does it mean? Have you ever stopped to think about that? Obviously, because the country is obsessed with immigration at the moment, very carefully cultivated obsession by the people responsible for most of the problems the country facing, who are understandably desperate, whether they're politicians or media figures, to pretend that it's all the fault of immigrants. But most obviously, you need a workforce to care for the elderly, whether it is in a social care setting or a healthcare setting. And the lower the birth rate and the more ageing the population, I mean, you come out the other end of it when things level out. But if it's top heavy, you've got more old people than young people, you've got a massive problem with workforce related issues, especially given that most of those old people won't be working at all. But what else beyond that? What does it mean? What does it mean? So William rightly points out that there is a positive argument from an environmental perspective, but I don't know that there are many positive arguments from any other perspective. If you can think of one, tell me. But what does it mean? So, why did you decide to have fewer or no children than you might originally or once have intended? Why do you think the whole population is presiding over a record low birth rate? And I mean, in a way, it's the same question as the last hour about digital ID cards. What should we be scared of? What should we actually be worried about? Why, in your view, is this such bad news? I mean, I'm not completely ignorant on that. I've got some idea on what the problems are and what the problems might be, but the more flesh we can get on those bones, the better. What are you worried about? What should we all be worried about with regard to a plummeting birth rate, a record low? So the personal and the political. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's just coming up to 20 past 11.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I missed a bit because it's not just not wanting to have children. This is the bit I was apologising for, oddly. It's twofold. It's not just having no children, it's having fewer than you intended. But think about how that question's framed. Why didn't you want to have children? How about if I frame it like this? Why didn't you want to be a parent? It's not the same question, is it? Why didn't you want to be a parent? And the answer to that, particularly for women, as we may discover, there's a fascinating thread on this, and it was the journalist Marie Leconte, of whom I'm a big fan, who was making some points that I found so interesting. I thought I must talk about this on the radio tomorrow. And the burden and strain, not just of childbirth, the physical load-bearing burden, but also what happens afterwards, the changes to your life. Once you take away what I described 20 minutes ago as a presumption, just that conveyor belt approach to life, that this is what you do. You meet someone, you settle down, you have a family. You take that away, and it ceases to be an expectation, a conveyor belt. You actually stop to think, do I actually want to do that? When I was in my 20s, you'd have been a weirdo if you said, oh, no, I don't want to be a parent. It's far. You'd have sounded selfish, self-indulgent. Oh, no, I don't think you do anymore. So don't just tell me why you decided not to have children. Tell me why you didn't want to be a parent. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. 11:22 is the time, and Mark is in Wigan. Mark, what would you like to say?
So on the point of, you were discussing about people only choosing to have one child or having children at a later point. I'm currently 31, my wife's 31, we're expecting our first within the next couple of days, and we've purposely waited until this point.
Yes.
Thank you. But we've purposely waited until this point for financial reasons, for job reasons, to be in a position where we're ready and we're secure. We have our mortgage. We had a strict set of, not rules, but checkpoints that we wanted to tick off. One of us had to be driving. We had to have a mortgage. We had to have security. We wanted to progress at work. None of us are particularly, we're not solicitors, we're not doctors. We didn't want to, hit a certain point in our careers, but we wanted to get to a point where the money coming in was more than enough to support an extra mouth and an extra person.
Would that have been different 20 years ago, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I'm one of four. I'm the youngest, so if we went by my mentality, I wouldn't be here. My wife is one of three. She's a middle child. Again, if her parents had waited, if my parents had waited the way we have, we potentially wouldn't be here to make this decision.
And how do you feel about the numbers, about the ones or twos? Well, if I met you when you were 18 and I said, how many kids are you going to have, what would you have said?
I'd have said 4.
Really? For as much as that?
Yeah, I used to want. I came from a big family, 4 of us. I wanted a big family, but with the way things are and the way just everything is, we've made the decisions we've made.
Gosh. And there it is. I mean, you are the kind of perfect example of this, and it's the externals. You'd still like 4 children, but you don't feel that you're in a position to have them.
No. And that's down to finances, the size of the house, and yeah, it's easy to say we'll go for a bigger house, but it's not easy to get a bigger house, is it?
And was it quite a straightforward process? You talked about it. I mean, it's because this is the bit that I struggle with because of my own experiences and what I went through in the past. You're not committed to it. It's like you kind of fancy it. I'd like a big family, and then reality bites, and you go, oh well, that's not really on the cards anymore. It's not like some massive loss. There's no sense of grief.
No.
And that's the big difference between your generation and mine. 20 years or so between us. Are you waiting for the waters to break, or are you going to?
Yes.
Good Lord, what are you doing on the radio?
Yeah, just on the way home from work.
Are you getting plenty of sleep?
Yes.
Good.
Yes, at the moment.
Because that's it, mate. Not for a long time. Not for a long time will you be getting plenty of sleep. I like this. 25 minutes after 11. I've got some breaking news for you, which makes me look like a bit of a muppet, given that I've been essentially claiming that when I asked Jessica Elgot earlier about the Angela Rayner story, I caught something in her voice that I couldn't quite put my finger on, but I can now, because they are reporting at The Guardian that Angela Rayner has referred herself to the ethics advisor after realising that she had underpaid stamp duty on her seaside flat. A very personal statement to The Guardian in which she talks about a deeply personal and distressing incident influencing some of the arrangements that she made, but the bottom line is that she has made an error that she deeply regrets. She classified the flat as her only property, despite spending much of her time with her children at the family house in Ashton-under-Lyne, Greater Manchester. I'm still not entirely clear on the detail of the offence, but if you were supposed to pay more stamp duty than you did, then unless you can make a very, very convincing case for having done so entirely by accident or unwittingly, then you've got a bit of a problem, I would argue. That was back in May of this year that she bought the property on the south coast, and she says that lawyers told her what stamp duty she should pay, but tax experts have subsequently told her that the flat could not be treated as her only residence because of the provisions of the trust that she set up for her family, and that's where things get rather personal. It's the stake in the constituency home in Ashton that she's put into a trust, originally set up in 2020 to manage a payment to one of her sons after he was left with lifelong disabilities. So it's a tricky one, but if she's referred herself to the Standards Committee, then she is recognising, at the very least, an error. More on that, no doubt, in the course of the day, and possibly some of that from Kemi Badenoch at PMQs. I think that's an existential threat to her position now. I really do. So make of that what you will. Lisa is in Ipswich. Lisa, what would you like to say?
Hi, I'm literally the person that you're talking about.
What, Angela Rayner? That's uncanny.
Back to the children, though.
Your accent's changed.
We've got 2 children. My husband would absolutely love to have a third, potentially a fourth, but it's just cost of living. It's just so expensive to do it.
And when did you realise this? What? Describe the penny dropping to me.
Well, so we've got, how old are they? 5 and a 3-year-old. And yeah, we had the chat. Do you want to have another one? Should we have another one? And he's very much, for it, but holidays change. You have to get a new car.
This is different. I'm not going to nail this down today, but the generational shift, because there'll be loads of people older than us, older than me, not to mention older than you, who were not, by any stretch of the imagination, rich, and yet who decided that they wanted 3, 4, 5 children, and did so. And you remember seeing cars with kids packed into them like sardines going off on holiday. With that change there is quite hard to pin down, isn't it? The idea that, because it's not selfish. Having another child would compromise every other aspect of my family's lifestyle, is what you're saying. You could afford it, but it's not. But the price you'd pay for it would be too high.
Yeah, I think that's the change, isn't it?
Yes, I do. Where does that come from? Is it consumerism? Have we just got higher expectations? Because you said holidays and cars straight away.
Yeah, I think it maybe is, isn't it? Because, going back a few years, only one person had to work and they could provide quite happily for the family. Whereas now, both of you have to work. Childcare is a juggle, just enough with 2 children. So adding a third in, all of a sudden, whereas, breakfast clubs, after school clubs, holiday clubs.
And there it is. So it's almost like a recalibration of priorities for parents and for families. It's coming up to 11:30. More, I think, on this breaking Angela Rayner story after the news. Natasha poised to join me with the traditional precursor to PMQs. I think we might rattle her cage a little earlier than usual, because I'm always wary of predictions, but the idea that this... I mean... certainly makes her position difficult. An admission that she did not pay enough stamp duty on a property that she bought in May. The arrangements I have set out, she says, reflect that reality that family life is rarely straightforward, particularly when dealing with disability, divorce, and the complexities of ensuring your children's long-term security. Every decision I have made has been guided by what I believe to be in my children's best interests. I deeply regret the error that has been made. I am committed to resolving this matter fully and providing the transparency that public service demands. It is for this reason, or that reason, I have today referred myself to the independent advisor on ministerial standards and will provide him with my fullest cooperation and access to all the information he requires. The question that remains, of course, is whether or not she will be allowed to resolve this matter fully herself and indeed provide the transparency that public service demands. Dominic Ellis is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:33. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I just cracking on with the conversation about childcare, or rather about childbirth. Angela Rayner currently giving a interview to Sky News, which I'll play you a bit of because the story gets more. I don't know quite what word to use. Some people have no sympathy whatsoever for her. Of course, that's the nature of politics. Some people are likely to change their view according to the detail as it emerges. And some people are probably going to hold fire and wait until the full details are in place. I'm notoriously bad at detail predictions. I can do big picture predictions. I can tell you Brexit will be a disaster and that Boris Johnson will be a hideous blemish upon prime ministerial histories in this country, or indeed that Liz Truss's budget would crash and burn in the most spectacular fashion, when many other people in this profession were telling you the polar opposite of all those things. But I don't know what it has done to her position. You'd have thought as housing minister, I'm reading more into it and listening to a little bit that I'll play you now of Angela Rayner speaking with Beth Rigby on Sky in the past 5 minutes. It looks like a genuine mistake. But I've always said to you that if you're a politician, then you should be, and I know it sounds odd, and I know that not all politicians do it, but you should be endeavouring to pay as much tax as possible. You should not be shaving anything or doing anything that reduces your burden, even if it's legal. I don't know whether that makes me sound naive, but here is the Deputy Prime Minister, and crucially, I think, for this story, the Housing Minister, talking to Beth Rigby at Sky News just about 5 minutes ago.
When I purchased it, I relied on the advice that I received from lawyers.
Yes.
Therefore, it's obviously not my main residence.
Yes.
And therefore, I pay the additional premium because it isn't my main residence, even though I only own one property. There are very different rules to council tax as they are to the rules around stamp duty, etc. But I took and relied on
that advice, and that advice was wrong, and now you are.
Was wrong.
So the accusations that you didn't pay enough stamp duty on Hove, they're actually accurate. You didn't.
They are accurate, but they're accurate in a different sense. I think the accusations were that I'd set up a trust or I'd flipped it to try and avoid paying it. But actually the complex area of the trust, which the advice that I relied upon didn't pick that up, the leading tax council, who has subsequently looked at it, has gone into that and has said that actually because of that, it did remain my sole property.
It is 11:36. There's a bit more of this interview I want to play to you as well, because the detail it's quite poignant, but I don't know that that's going to be enough to overshadow the simple fact that you heard in her answer to Beth Rigby's question there about the accuracy of the claims that she didn't pay enough stamp duty on the property in Hove. That will kick in, regardless of whether or not she didn't pay the stamp duty on the property in Hove for the reasons that her critics have alleged. That bit won't be true, but of course the fact that she didn't will be, I think, very, very difficult to now navigate. This one is going to be very, very interesting to see how this plays out. Natasha Clark will join us just after 1:45 with a little bit more insight, and then, of course, the business of PMQs will kick in. I mean, you've got to sort of wonder if her account is entirely correct. She took advice in good faith that turned out to be wrong. What is she being accused of? Trusting the wrong person. But of course, what she's being accused of is not paying the full amount of stamp duties. There's two very different accusations there. What did she do wrong? She trusted the wrong expert. Turns out the expert gave her duff advice. Yeah, but the advice was something that allowed her to duck a stamp duty payment. And the trust was set up to care for her disabled child, which is why the court order in place that prevented her from talking about it only got lifted last night. That's what I mean by poignant. 11:38 is the time. Back to a slightly different flavour now to the whole question of childbirth, but back now to the plummeting birth rate in this country. And I haven't got the question right yet because it only popped up during the course of the last call, but this idea that as a population we've changed. You don't want to be a parent, or you've got one child and that's quite enough, thank you, because what we understand better, and I'm not one of those people that's going to claim feminism has let women down, but you understand better the impact upon other areas of your life. Women today lead much more varied, diverse and richer lives than their grandmothers did, certainly, and in many cases than their mothers did. But it changes the relationship with mothering as well. It's a shared burden, much more than it was in the 70s, parenting, or the 50s. But it also impacts much more heavily on for example, work-life balance. If you're not working at all, then the idea of having 3 or 4 children, even if you're not rich, was a lot easier to process than the idea of doing the same when you need to work. 11:39 is the time. Lisa is in Kensal Rise. Lisa, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Firstly, thank you, because you've got me through my maternity leave feeling fairly sane.
Oh, so, thank you for that.
Very, very much in debt to you. But yeah, so I'm 39 years old. We have our first baby in October of last year. And basically, I am absolutely desperate to have a second baby. Have always imagined my life with 2-3 kids in it. Yeah. Me and my partner both have siblings that we're very close to, but we fall into a kind of funny area where we earn just over the 100k household bracket. So we don't qualify for any childcare.
Gosh.
Yeah, nothing at all. So with my age and, you know, having done the maths, if we were to have a second baby, which would have to be fairly soon, we would have 2 babies in nursery at the same time, which would be £3,600 a month. And, you know, we've looked at what we would have left over, and it's close to £500 at the end of the month once we've paid mortgage.
So you can't do it?
Bill. We just can't do it. And it's the saddest thing ever. Like, I hate thinking that she'll grow up without a sibling. But we're stuck, you know, on paper. We do well for ourselves. We've got good jobs.
That's I can hear her in the background as well. That's lovely noise.
Yeah.
But our parents would never have made calculations like this, would they?
No, they wouldn't have done, but they wouldn't have had the same cost of childcare, the high interest rates on mortgages, all of that stuff.
Well, they would have had, the interest rates were in the 20s, I think, at some point.
Well, yeah, that's true.
In the 80s. Something has changed in the way that, I don't know what it is. It's probably not our fault. We just feel less secure.
Yeah, it's true. I think that everything is so volatile at the moment. I will have to be a working mum. So when you look at after school care, wraparound care, everything's just so expensive.
And there it is. And the experience of parenting hasn't put you off at all, because some people are kind of happy with.
I mean, I'm very tired, James. You were right to wish that other caller to sleep now. But no, it's a complete joy, and it honestly does just break my heart that'll be it for us. And it purely just comes down to finances and just not even being able to stretch what we have.
It's what's his chops, isn't it? Out of Great Expectations, it's Mr. McCorber territory. Is that you spend slightly over your income, result misery. Just spend slightly under it, result happiness. Thank you, Lisa. And you paint a poignant picture. I'm interested also in people for whom this is quite a straightforward desire rather than a financial necessity. The impact of being a parent on every other aspect of your life is so enormous, so profound, that you've just decided that it's not for you. It ties in slightly with Gary Stevenson's theory about the middle class being next. The middle class is now being under attack from the economic system, the sort of billionaires, concentration of wealth miles above us, kind of rinsed out everybody who might be loosely described as working class. Where are they going to go next in their never-ending pursuit of wealth? Well, they're going to make the middle class less financially secure. And one of the first signs that the middle class feels less financially secure, I think, is the fact that they're not having as many children as they intended to. I managed to knit that together rather well. Back to Angela Rayner, I think, because this story is... She's the Deputy Prime Minister, so don't waste tenpence telling me that you don't understand why the story's getting so much attention. The Deputy Prime Minister has admitted a mistake, if you like, in her tax arrangements. And as Housing Minister, the fact that it's tax arrangements regarding a house purchase is particularly difficult. But it is a lot more... What's the word you would use? You could say complicated, or you could say poignant, than some other financial stories involving politicians and their tax affairs have been in the past. And this little clip here from her interview with Beth Rigby on Sky News will show you why.
I've been in shock, really, because I thought I'd done everything proper and I'd relied on the advice that I received. And I'm devastated because I've always upheld the rules and always have done and always felt proud to do that. I feel, that it is devastating for me. And the fact that the reason why those confidentiality clauses are in place was to protect my son, who, through no fault of his own, he's vulnerable, he's got this life-changing, lifelong conditions, and I don't want him or anything to do with his day-to-day life to be subjected to that level of scrutiny, because it's his and my ex-husband it's not fair on them. Often my family are dragged in because of what my role is and what I do, but I try to uphold the highest standards, and that's why I've referred myself, so that the independent advisor can look at everything. He can look at all of the details of what's gone on.
Dave asks, I once announced the wrong train arriving at Reading Station on platform 4 because the signalman gave me incorrect information. Should I have resigned? I'll take calls on that after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:48 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We talked about that story involving the comedy writer Graham Linehan at the top of the show today. Mark Rowley, the Commissioner of the Met, has issued a statement which is exactly what I thought was going to happen. And it's why people trying to make political capital out of the arrest at Heathrow of Linehan very, very irresponsible. It's a really odd thing to do, because the simple requirement of the law is that if somebody issues a threat of violence or encourages violence against a protected group, then it could be an offence. A threat to punch someone from a protected group could be an offence. That is the nature of the existing legislation. So Rowley's point in this statement would be they have little choice but to make the arrest. I don't want to prejudice anything, but the likelihood of charges following once the case has been properly considered seemed to me to be very low, and the arrest itself feels like a major overreaction. But the Commissioner of the Met Police now, because of irresponsible journalism, has to explain things that are easily available to all of us and very easily understood. He writes, most reasonable people would agree that genuine threats of violence, physical violence, against an identified person or group should be acted on by officers. Such actions can and do have serious and violent real-world implications. And here's the crucial bit. When it comes to lesser cases, i.e. when it feels unlikely that there is a genuine threat of physical violence, where, in Rowley's words, there is ambiguity in terms of intent and harm, policing has been left between a rock and a hard place by successive governments who have given officers no choice but to record such incidents as crimes when they are reported. They are then obliged to follow all lines of inquiry and take action as appropriate. So it's all very well Keir Starmer saying he doesn't think it was a very good idea, and various Tories queuing up to pretend, including commentators, not just politicians, to pretend that it has anything to do with Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer. The bottom line is that successive governments have left this legislation in place, which means if there's even the suspicion that somebody is encouraging violence against a protected group, they have to have their collar felt. And that is, I'm afraid, the story. I think the Daily Mail managed to give it 5 pages today. I may have miscounted, but the police have no choice in these matters because a threat of violence against a protected group is something that there is a statutory requirement to investigate. And there it is. But, you know, we're living in a world where facts seem not to matter. Speaking of which, Natasha Clark is here. Can I start with a question that's a bit unfair?
It never stops you usually, James.
That's a very good point. Is she toast?
This is, I think, really tricky for Keir Starmer.
That's a cop-out answer.
Okay, she could be.
Right.
There you go.
Still a cop-out.
She could be.
Yes.
I don't like making political predictions, but this looks really bad for Angela Rayner today for several reasons. You know, firstly, she is Labour's main attack dog on the issue of standards in public life and has been for many years, you know, accusing the Conservatives of being you know, not up to scratch in terms of their politicians. And she has now today admitted making a very big error and saying that she deeply regrets it, saying she's already considered resigning over this matter, which I take to think really that maybe she's already had a conversation with the Prime Minister about whether she should resign. And, you know, remember when we've been talking about this before with other ministers, Rushan Ali most recently had to resign.
He makes his feelings clear.
He does, and when there is a situation where a minister has made a mistake which is meant to look bad, and even if they've not actually done anything wrong in terms of the law, which under the case of Rushan Ali, it looked like she hadn't done anything wrong. She still thought that it was the best decision for her to resign to stop being a distraction from government. So if Keir Starmer sticks by her, and at the moment it looks like he will do, and we'll hear from him at PMQs more soon, it's going to be a pretty tricky political storm to weather, this one.
Until the report comes in. I mean, if the Standards Commissioner finds that she really did take advice in good faith and is blameless for accepting that advice, if she's still in post then, it could go away. I mean, of course, when standards advisors with previous governments, most obviously Boris Johnson's came back with evidence of epic wrongdoing, they didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Even when they were as guilty as sin. Yes,
for sure.
Exactly.
But
I'd rather live in this world where it does matter.
Exactly. And for Keir Starmer, I think no matter what the ethics watchdog comes back with, he will stick to what they suggest in terms of Angela Rayner's future, and I'm sure he will probably kick the can down the road on that one to whatever they do say.
It will be, it won't go away. What day is it? Wednesday. It might have gone away by this time next week, but it's going to be big front page news the Daily Mail's already gone mad. Do you know what millions of people in this country are asking today?
I do. I
think we need a bit of light relief, if you would, Keith, because this is absolutely one of the finest ever. I got on the bus this morning.
I thought about you when I saw that headline today. I thought James is going to go crazy for this one.
Lots of people have already said, why haven't you done this?
Unhinged headline.
So I got on the bus this morning on my way into work, as I always do, and the bus driver, who, I sometimes see him, it's not the same bus driver every day, but he sometimes wants to know what's coming up on the show later today. And he said, do you know what you should do, James? And I said, what? He says, you should ask your callers, when did Britain become North Korea? I said, what? He goes, it's outrageous, isn't it? He said, millions of people on the bus today. Well, everyone getting on the bus has said to me, when did Britain become North Korea, James? That's the front page headline in the Daily Mail today. When did Britain become North Korea? Referencing a story which the Met Police Commissioner Mark Rowley has responded to by saying, I don't believe we should be policing toxic culture wars debates, and officers are currently in an impossible position. I've offered to provide suggestions to the Home Office on where the law and policy could be clarified. Greater clarity and common sense would enable us to limit the resources we dedicate to tackling online statements to those cases creating real threats in the world. So there it is. Sensible from the Met Police Commissioner, and
Unhinged headline
from the Daily Mail. So 10 o'clock tomorrow's show. When did Britain become North Korea?
I can't wait. Can I come on?
0345 606 0973. And also, should that fella have resigned when he gave out the wrong platform at Reading Station after being misinformed by the signalman 30 years ago? PMQs.
Yeah, so obviously half an hour ago, I wouldn't have thought that this was going to come up at Prime Minister's Questions, but maybe it will in some form, and I think Keir Starmer will be wise to at least talk about it. Otherwise, he's going to get asked about it by someone else, right? And this, obviously, the timing of this interview is, I'm sure, not a coincidence. Downing Street were talking yesterday about how there was this court order in place. And actually, this is where I do have a lot of sympathy with Angela Rayner over this incredibly complicated tax arrangement that she has with her ex-husband. She's got a son which which needs care. They
in that house. So this is
house.
what makes it unique, almost.
Exactly.
That he lives in the house and looks after the children sometimes, and then at other times she lives in the house.
Exactly, and for the definition of what is your primary residence, they both have a stake to saying this is their primary residence. It's incredibly...
Although she no longer has a financial stake in the house.
Exactly, yeah, because she's now taken that out. She's bought this new property. Will any of this matter?
It depends how sharp the knives are, in a way.
True, and it depends whether there are any enemies in Keir Starmer's cabinet that might want to, push the knife in a little further and twist it. Because she is
perceived as a favourite to replace him, should that situation ever arise.
Of course, and also, the other issue of, as Patrick Maguire writes in the Times today, there are other issues facing Angela Rayner. The housing promise, the pledge to build 1.5 million homes, is going to be incredibly difficult for this government to meet, and it's very much, I think, hinging on her and her department.
So, an hour ago, what would Badenoch's plan have been?
Well, I thought that she might reference the Graham Lineker mess, debacle, however you like to...
It's very disingenuous, given that Mark Rowley has already explained that it is a legislative legacy from previous governments.
For sure, yeah, exactly.
And nothing to do with Keir Starmer.
Nothing to do with Keir Starmer apart from some of the decisions that were taken as DPP in his case about some of the cases.
Doesn't make law
about this. No, he doesn't make law, but and I think he does now. What Wes Streeting was talking about earlier about the need to clarify the law, that clearly is where the government are going on this situation. So they do have a bit of more of a story to tell. I think Keir Starmer will probably be able to bat away, accusations about North Korea or whatever else quite well today by saying, look, we've inherited this system, we will look at it again. Wes Streeting said to LBC earlier, we do think that the law probably does need to change in this area. So I think that she's got potentially not quite as much of a leg to stand on this one. However, it's such a high-profile name, a high-profile celebrity, it might resonate with a few more people than you might think. The other alternative, of course, the budget.
Yeah.
It does feel like we're a little bit far away from it. We're 10 weeks away from it, but it is one of Kemi Badenoch's stronger topics to go on in Prime Minister's Questions, the economy, all of the problems that Rachel Reeves has been facing over the summer. We've had a summer of speculation about which taxes she could potentially have to rise. The government, of course, hasn't really been able to go near any of that discussion yet, but I'm sure in the next 10 weeks it is going to reach absolute fever pitch with what people think the Chancellor's going to have to do to fill a reported £40 billion black hole that is as a result of several things, not least government policy. So she could go on the economy. She may choose to go on a more culture warsy issue. I think, we've discussed before, when she goes on migration, she's definitely on a bit of a weaker plank. But let's not forget what the context of this is this week. Reform's Party conference gathering later this week. I think both Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch will want to have a little bit of a pop at Nigel Farage, who we believe is in the US giving a speech, and obviously not in the House of Commons today.
That's dog bites man, isn't it? Nigel Farage not being in the House of Commons, or indeed in Clacton.
Sometimes he does ask questions at Prime Minister's Questions every couple of days. We usually don't take it because we're usually in depth of our discussion by this point, of which Nigel Farage does usually stand up. But yes, exactly. I think they will want to get in their attacks on Nigel Farage early because he is going to be dominating the airwaves when he gets back to Britain.
Well, only if the airwaves let him, which of course is a conversation for another day. These ones will be relatively clean, unless of course he changes his mind and wants to come on for a rematch. The door is always open of this studio for the fella. So not any rabbits really. That we're not making any rabbit flavoured predictions about what she's likely to pull out of that. Do you think Starmer will mention her apparent economy with the actuality regarding her offer from Stanford? It's not his. I said to Jessica Elgot, who broke the story earlier and who failed to tell me that she was about to break the story about Angela Rayner as well. It's not how Starmer operates, actually, usually.
No, he doesn't usually, but I think actually he likes to make fun of her, doesn't he? And it's maybe something that he could use to sort of show how irrelevant she is, as many of the public think these days, right? Despite being the official opposition, I think a lot of what Kemi Badenoch is saying at the moment just isn't reaching. And that's going to be their real problem as they go towards their party conference, isn't it? How do the Tories say anything, announce anything, be relevant anymore when the country just isn't listening to them? There was some polling.
It just isn't.
No.
It's a weird one, really, because, some of the coverage of Angela Rayner is clearly informed by fear of her, whether it's people leaking stories from within her own party or whether it's right-wing media being frightened of everything she represents. No one's really frightened of Kemi Badenoch in a political sense. You might find her terrifying in other ways, but she's not frightening in a political sense.
Yeah, there was some polling done by Merlin Strategy that I was mentioning earlier this week, which said 46% of Tory voters don't have a good view of Kemi Badenoch herself. She's facing an an uphill battle within her own party.
So he may decide to reach for that or break that glass. And we'll head over immediately that she gets to her feet, which is, as I'd almost forgotten. How many weeks has it been since we did this?
It's been about 9 weeks, I think.
Feels like ages. You're looking very well.
And you.
I just want to add something to the hate speech thing, that Sundar Katwala, who I think is a really good contributor to public discourse, so very much a force for good, from the British Future organisation, he's pointed out that on Twitter, where a lot of these offences occur, things have become unbearable in recent years, since Elon Musk bought it, and he is on the receiving end regularly of go home P word, except that the people telling him to do that don't use the euphemism. They don't précis the P word. They use it in full. So how on earth are you going to water down legislation that is apparently not strong enough at the moment to deal with that sort of racial hatred is a challenge that perhaps Wes Streeting didn't fully appreciate earlier when he waded into the conversation. Next time Mark Rowley's on with Nick, I might ring him myself and ask exactly what suggestions he has provided to the Home Office on where law and policy should be clarified, because it is...
it's a really difficult balance, isn't it, to get it right?
Because there's no way that should be going on, and equally... as he argues, there's no way that their discretion, an officer's discretion, should be completely ignored when weighing up a threat to a protected group. 2 minutes after 12 is the time. Keir Starmer on his feet in the House of Commons. Angela Rayner sitting next to him. Rachel Reeves on the other side. They almost take it in turns, don't they, to be the focus of unwelcome attention. Rachel Reeves and Angela Rayner. Let's find out what Ms Badenoch has to say. Mrs Badenoch.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I know the whole House will want to send our condolences to the family of our former colleague, David Warburton. I also welcome the fact that the Deputy Prime Minister has referred herself to the ethics advisor. She has admitted she underpaid tax. So why is she still in office? But there is not just a crisis at the very top of his cabinet, Mr Speaker. There is a crisis brewing for the whole country. When was the last time the cost of government borrowing was so high?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, can I join her in her comments about Mr Warburton? I think the whole House would unite on an issue such as that. In relation to the Deputy Prime Minister, she has explained her personal circumstances in detail. Absolutely. She's gone over and above in setting out the details, including Mr Speaker, yesterday afternoon, asking a court to lift a confidentiality order in relation to her own son. I know from speaking at length to the Deputy Prime Minister just how difficult that decision was for her and her family. But she did it to ensure that all information is in the public domain. She has now referred herself to the independent advisor. That is the right thing to do. But I can be clear, I am very proud to sit alongside a Deputy Prime Minister who is building 1.5 million homes, who is bringing the biggest upgrade to workers' rights in a generation, and who's come from a working class background to be Deputy Prime Minister of this country. Mr Speaker, on the question of borrowing costs, they have risen across the world, as the Leader of the Opposition well knows. We are driving them down by getting debt down. That is hardwired into our fiscal rules. Those fiscal rules are non-negotiable. But, Mr Speaker, I'm not going to take lectures on the economy from the party opposite, who crashed the economy, mortgages went through the roof, and a record fall in living standards.
Mr Speaker, I'm not sure we would have heard all that sympathy if it was the Conservative Deputy Prime Minister who was being attacked. I remember when the Prime Minister said that tax evasion is a criminal offence and should be treated as all other fraud. If he had a backbone, he would sack her. But let's get back to the issue of borrowing. He did not answer why it is so high. Conservatives left him the fastest growing economy in the G7. Under him, the cost of our borrowing is now higher than in Greece. Why does the Prime Minister think this is?
Minister. Mr Speaker, if it had been the party opposite, there wouldn't have been the accountability that there now is in place, because there's been years and years avoiding it. And she makes her claims about the economy under their watch are about as credible as her place at Stanford University, frankly. But, Mr Speaker, She leaves out of account because she wants to talk down the country. We've got the highest growth in the G7. Those figures, I look forward to her getting up and welcoming that. 5 interest rate cuts in a row. And of course, Mr. Speaker, £120 billion of investment in the first year of a Labour government. That is a record.
It's a terrible record, Mr. Speaker. I stand by every single thing that I have said. He cannot say why borrowing is higher under him. I will tell him why it is higher. It is because the Chancellor changed the fiscal rules so she could borrow record amounts. She maxed out the country's credit card, and that has pushed up borrowing costs. These are their bad choices, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, former members of the Monetary Policy Committee are warning, and I quote, that we are heading for an economic crash. Why does he think that he is right and they are wrong?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, she can't resist. She comes straight back to talk the country down at every opportunity. She doesn't welcome the highest growth in the G7. She could have got up and welcomed that, Mr. Speaker, but no. What about the 380,000 jobs we've created? She can welcome that, but no. What about the 3 trade deals we've got? Not only does she not welcome them, she opposes them. And of course, she hasn't welcomed the Norway deal, the biggest deal for shipbuilding in a very, very long time. She should stop talking down the country and get behind the renewal this government is delivering.
Mr. Speaker, he is dragging down the country. He is dragging it down. How can he stand there and say that he is creating jobs? Unemployment has gone up every single month under this Labour government. And if he doesn't know why borrowing costs are going up, another reason is that the markets can see that he is too weak to control spending. Now, we're reading that he wants to have another go at welfare costing. What makes him think that they will vote for it this time?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we picked... I think I saw that the leader of the opposition said, I think at the weekend to the Sunday Times, that I think she said this, I've inherited a gigantic mess and I'm cleaning it up. She said it's very difficult, it's going to take a while. I know exactly how she feels.
Mr. Speaker, we're not the ones referring ourselves to ethics advisors. The fact is, he is floundering. Mr. Speaker, he is floundering. Perhaps he should have a read of the covers of the...
Shh. Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, perhaps he should have a read of the covers...
Order. We don't want to start the session with somebody leaving, do we? If somebody wants to volunteer, please do so. If not, I will choose one.
They can do the fake chairs as much as they like. The whole country knows what a mess of the economy they are making. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that taxes are going up for everyone, except perhaps the Deputy Prime Minister. I warned before the summer that we would face weeks of speculation about which taxes would be going up. The former head of the IFS says this sort of uncertainty is actively damaging to the economy. And now we find that we have to wait until the 26th of November for a budget. Does he really think the country or the markets can wait that long?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she said they're not referring themselves to the ethics advisors. That's amongst the reasons they got booted out of office last year. And she complains that we're going through the due process for a budget and going through the necessary steps. We tried a budget under their watch without going through those steps. What happened? They blew up the economy. We'll take no lessons from them.
This is desperate stuff from the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker. This week, he had another reset. This morning, the Prime Minister scrapped his 5 missions, and after scrapping his 3 foundations, scrapping his 6 first steps for change, and his 7 pillars for growth, the truth is this man has got no clue, 0 clue. But this is serious, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's incompetence is hurting real people. They're losing their jobs. The cost of everything is going up, from energy bills to the weekly shop. This is a crisis made in Downing Street. Isn't the truth that he is too weak to change course and too arrogant to admit he got things wrong?
I don't know what social media site she's been on this morning, Mr. Speaker, but I think the chair of the Tory party said that we were the firefighters, this government. Well, in a sense we are, because we're putting out the fires that they created. They were the arsonists. the biggest fall in living standards on record and blowing up the finances. We spent the first year putting out their fires, quite right too. But now, Mr. Speaker, we're delivering on the cost of living. Funded childcare, £7,500 for working families. Free breakfast clubs, opening new schools-based nurseries. That's what we're fighting for. The best start for every child in this country.
Paulette Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Mayor of the West Midlands, Richard Parker, is delivering growth and jobs by backing SMEs like Bogue Toys in my constituency of Birmingham Erdington, which has just doubled in size. Will the Prime Minister join me in praising this success and confirm that boosting ambitious small and medium-sized businesses across the UK remains a key priority of his government? Thank you.
Prime Minister.
Well, can I recognise and congratulate the businesses in her constituencies? Mr. Speaker, we've published our small business plan, which was very well received, includes new rules cracking down on late payments, much long been asked for, £3 billion boost to more business loans and fairer business rate systems to support small businesses. That's why it was so warmly received. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Sir Ed David, leader of the Liberal Democrat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of these benches, can I join the Leader of the Opposition in sending our condolences to the family of David Warburton? And I'm sure the whole House will join me in paying tribute to Annette Brooke, who served in this House for 14 years and sadly passed away last month. Annette dedicated her life to public service and serving the people of Dorset, and she is greatly missed. Mr. Speaker, we have all seen the horrifying images from Gaza. The baby is so thin from starvation you can see their skeletons. The bodies of children killed while queuing for water. The emaciated hostages still held captive by Hamas. The Prime Minister has rightly said he wants to stop all that. So when the one man in the world who has the power to stop that comes here to our country on a state visit, will the Prime Minister look President Trump in the eye and urge him to use the influence on Netanyahu and Qatar to make it stop?
Prime Minister.
Can I join him on his comments about Annette Brooke? And also in his description about the horrifying situation in Gaza, and it is horrifying. We're looking at a man-made famine on top of everything else, and that is why we're expending so much of our time with partners seeking to bring about a ceasefire, to get humanitarian aid in at pace, to get the hostages out, and of course to put forward a peace plan that can actually take us to a two-stage solution. And of course I'll talk to all international leaders about that. I would gently say to them that if he hadn't refused the invite to the state banquet, he could be there 2 weeks on Tuesday and speak to President Trump himself. And I'm surprised it's not an act of leadership to pass up that opportunity.
Mr. Speaker, I have to disagree with him on that. We are now debating this issue. But here's an issue where I hope he will agree with me. The European Convention on Human Rights is a British creation that protects all our basic rights and freedoms. Rights of children, disabled people, survivors of domestic abuse, victims of horrific crimes, everyone. It protects care home residents from abuse and families from being spied on by councils. But the leader of the Conservative Party and the leader of Reform want to join Russia and Vladimir Putin by withdrawing from the convention. The Liberal Democrats disagree, Mr. Speaker, and so do the majority of the British people. So will the Prime Minister categorically rule out withdrawing from the ECHR or suspending it or watering down our rights in any way?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will not withdraw from the European Convention of Human Rights. We do need to make sure that both the convention and other instruments are fit for the circumstances we face at the moment, and therefore, of course, we have been, as we made clear, looking at the interpretation of some of those provisions. It would be a profound mistake to pull out of these instruments, because the first thing that would follow is every other country in the world that adheres to these instruments would pull out of all their agreements with this country. That would be catastrophic for dealing with the problem that we're actually dealing with.
Irene Campbell.
Very thoughtful of Ed Davey. You can tell he was sitting in this chair last week, can't you? Because he's brought us in absolutely bang on time for this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
17 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Well, where do we start on that? First of all, lots of people suggesting we should give ourselves a little pat on the back for, between us, nailing it. Although the Stamford thing, he did handle quite nicely. He did bring that up.
He made it into a joke.
He did, didn't he? Yes, exactly. And mocking her, which she just hates.
Yeah, she hates it. It rattles her. And he, is able to bring up a sort of story that's obviously been in the news without sort of spending too much time and attention on it. I do feel like, because of the seriousness of this Angela Rayner story, Kemi Badenoch's missed a goal by not going bigger on it, and I think she should have done. That's my take from today.
I'm conscious of footballification, so
is it an open goal? Potentially not.
I don't know, and I don't want my questioning of whether or not it's quite as serious as you think to be informed by the fact that I quite like Angela Rayner. I think she's a really nice person and a good force in politics. So you have to say, what would you do if it was a Tory? And if a Tory had taken advice contingent upon having a profoundly disabled child and made a decision that turned out to be wrong, having taken advice from an expert, I like to think that I would say what I'm saying now to you, which is that it's tricky, and it's the context of the boy, the son, that I think makes it a little bit hard to be too. It won't stop the Daily Mail, but Kemi Badenoch may be a slightly better person than the editor of that newspaper. No,
I think what it shows about her is that she's unable to respond quick enough and think on her feet, adapt to a changing political situation.
She won't like that.
She won't. Well, you saw this when, I can't remember what it was, Keir Starmer announcing a potential U-turn, was it winter fuel something, a couple of months ago, and she was unable to...
Do you think?
To really note this, to really say, actually, that's the Prime Minister there, admitting that his policy is wrong and he's going to have to change tack. She's not nimble enough on her feet at Prime Minister's question. She's not able to go, this huge story about Angela Rayner has blown up, but instead of focusing my PMQs on it, which I've clearly been preparing for sort of a few hours or if not days now, she's able to pepper it in. So she is asked a few questions of it, but to go solely on the budget, and I was thinking about this earlier, it's a little too far away, I think, in many people's minds, to be able to focus on it solely. I think she should have gone in a little bit harder. If this were a Conservative politician and the Labour Party were going on the attack on standards, I think, even with the context that we've just talked about her son, her family, I think, it reminds me of when Amber Rudd resigned, because she had incorrect information that she put on a Home Affairs Select Committee. And she says, it was up to me. The buck ended with me. I should have got better advice. I didn't. I made a mistake. I misled the House, and she resigned. And maybe that was a better political time.
That's very persuasive, actually. In fact, it's neatly highlighted by two contributions. One from Scott saying all she had to do was ask whoever was advising her, is there any way this could come back and bite me on the backside? Which is, you'd think, the question that you would ask everybody. Whereas another, Jackie just says, I'd imagine that because she knows how closely she is scrutinised, she would have tried incredibly hard to do the right thing. They can both be true, can't they?
I think it's quite clear that Angela Rayner has tried to do the right thing. That is not the question that we're asking here. The question we're asking here is does this situation make firstly Keir Starmer's job harder? The answer is of course yes. And secondly, does it make her position untenable in what she's trying to do with reform of council tax, with reform of stamp duty, with reform of housing? Does that all make it a lot better? I think the answer is also yes, it's going to make her job a lot harder.
Well, you can listen to rather good full disclosure interviews with both Angela Rayner and Amber Rudd, wherever you get your podcasts. The Amber Rudd one rather more recent, but both very insightful. I think I disagree with you on that parallel, on the grounds that it was government business that prompted Amber Rudd's resignation. This is not government, this is personal business, so they don't...
This is personal, but because of Angela Rayner's job, because she's in charge of looking at houses and stamp duty and property taxes and all of this stuff. It's so intrinsically linked. But I think it's worse than that, I think, because it just goes to the heart of what Keir Starmer promised when he came into Downing Street was we're going to be better than those guys. And remember when Nadeem Zahawi's
£3.7 million
that he didn't pay. Yeah, this is a different sum of money.
And denied that there was any investigation into his affairs whatsoever.
So I think that the question will be now, and
can the Tories make it sound as serious as that when it clearly isn't?
Sure, but equally, can we go back through what Angela Rayner's team have said, what Keir Starmer's team have said, what Number 10 have said, and does the record stack up there? Is there any point where, we've heard ministers for the last few days sort of come out to defend Angela Rayner on this. Is there any point where they could see that potentially they may have been a little bit misled by this? I think there are questions we need to look at.
And that would be crucial. David's been in touch. So should I have resigned then? And the answer is yes, for that outrageous behaviour at Reading. In fact, Brian was in touch earlier. So I missed a train at Reading Station the other day because of a wrong announcement about the platform number. I can't think of any consequence severe enough for whoever the perpetrator turns out to be. So we're solving all the big questions on the programme today, except, of course, the biggest one of all, which is...
When did Britain become North Korea?
Answers on a postcard to the Daily Mail, please, at your first opportunity. And then Ed Davey. Hang on, before we move on to Ed Davey, we have a little bit of time. And I know everyone is talking about Angela Rayner, but and rightly so. But how much trouble is Kemi Badenoch in at the moment?
Can I just have one more question? One more point on Angela Rayner. The fact that she discussed resigning, I think, should show you how seriously she's taking it, actually. But yes, on Kemi Badenoch, we're obviously going close to Tory conference, and everybody is gearing up for what they hope will be a bit of a, right, here's our policies, here's what we stand for. People in the Tory party have admitted to me they've got 6 to 9 months for Kemi Badenoch to turn it around. That's their time frame that they're looking at. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any point in getting rid of her right now because you've got a really tough set of local elections next year, and you need someone to take the fall if they're going to be as bad as expected.
That's true. You get a new
why would you get rid of somebody before that? You've got Wales. You've got Scotland. I was speaking earlier today on a panel alongside Gawain Towler from the Reform Party, and he said that, if the Tories do as badly in Scotland and Wales, and they are no longer seen as the Conservative and Union Party as the official opposition across the breadth of the country, where does that leave Kemi Badenoch? Where does that leave the Tory party? I don't think she's in political trouble imminently, but I agree with that Tory source that 6 to 9 months is around the time frame many people are giving her.
A few people suggesting that you never know what's going on off air, do you? Off screen or off camera, but that she's looking quite broken. That she's not looking like she's enjoying. And I mentioned that to you. You were less concerned. I don't think
she looked particularly downbeat or
broken's a strong word. It doesn't look like she's enjoying herself.
I don't think she's enjoying herself. Well, James, if you were in that job, would you be enjoying yourself? I think it's a really difficult, tough job. And, there was some polling out earlier this week, the polling I was mentioning in reference to Kemi Badenoch, which was talking about the Conservatives. And most people still think that the Conservatives have not learned their lessons from the last election, and they're not ready to listen to them as a party yet. And it's really tough when you are the official opposition and you are out day in, day out trying to make your case for the party, but no one's listening to you. No one wants to listen to you.
I can't remember anything quite like this. Even, you're too young probably, but even when Michael Howard was in charge, all right, Ian Duncan Smith's probably the closest. But there's probably a bit of sexism involved, sadly, as well, in that people are more likely to be more rude about a woman than they are about a man.
That's probably true, but also just the sheer scale of the defeat as well. Let's not, when we compare landslides, even Tony Blair's landslide wasn't as big as Keir Starmer's landslide, right? So they have lost after 14 years in, monumental fashion, and it is going to take a long time for any political party to recover from that. This will be, their conference in a few weeks' time will be her really first chance, because this time last year at a conference, she wasn't even elected as leader of the Conservative Party. So it wasn't even her, she wasn't even able to really have the limelight. So we will see in a few weeks how much her cut-through gets through to the public, and I suspect it will be not much.
Hard to know what else she could do, actually. And then to Ed Davey, who, not uniquely, but certainly a rare voice in reminding people of what is going on in Gaza.
Gaza and Trump.
An interesting exchange there, because they both have a point.
I found this discussion fascinating while you were off when we heard the news that Ed Davey was going to be boycotting the state dinner. A fascinating debate. How do you affect change in political life? Is it by going to a state dinner and having a word with Donald Trump about the seriousness of the situation in Gaza? Or Is it by saying, actually, I can't take part in that conversation, I will make more impact by walking out of that and using that on a sort of political stage? And I think...
Did people do phone-ins on it?
Yeah.
Did they? That's an interesting...
Yeah,
I've just
really.
heard you say that. I thought, that's a good one.
It's a good phone-in, yeah.
Phone-in.
Sorry you've missed it. It was last week's news.
That's never stopped me in the past.
Last week's news. But it was good. But I really fundamentally disagree with Ed Davey's position. I think he should be going. I think he should be using his opportunity, as Keir Starmer said just then, to really bend his ear on Gaza.
Unless,
he's not.
and we're not agreeing about much today, but unless this is nothing to do with trying to change Donald Trump's mind about Gaza and everything to do with trying to change some voters' minds about Ed Davey.
Maybe.
In which case it could prove to be a very effective tactic. So again, two things could be true at the same time.
Two things could both be true. We know Ed Davey is a big fan of a stunt, and that is a pretty big one to be able to pull, to say, actually, I'm not even going to be going to this big state banquet. But yeah, in terms of affecting political change, you'd think he would really welcome the chance to chew the president's ear off. But actually, maybe he doesn't.
Yes.
It's tricky.
A lot of people, obviously the Rayner stuff, we'll probably get an hour out of it tomorrow as well, but I think there's the politics is on one side of this, and then the detail is on the other. And of course, with our media, it's unlikely that the wood will be seen for the trees. But if someone comes forward and says, I gave her this advice and I was wrong, the story changes again.
Tax is tricky. Tax is it's a really complicated and potentially a unique situation that Angela Rayner has found herself in. And I'm not a tax expert. Maybe she'd get one on tomorrow to explain just how complicated this arrangement is, because I think, everybody is going to struggle to understand the intricacies of Angela Rayner's
doing a lot of production today on my programme, coming up with topics and guest suggestions.
Would you like a question?
We've
got it.
When did Britain become North Korea?
Brilliant.
You see, it's almost like we planned this stuff.
It is tricky, and I think people, like I say, people will have sympathy with her for the details of it, but I don't think it's about that. It's about the perception. Is she perceived to have done something wrong, yes or no? And I think that will be a tricky one to answer, and B, whether it impacts on her doing her job and whether she is prohibited from doing so, with Russian Ali, with Tulip Sadiq, rather, not found to have done anything wrong. But actually a distraction for the government.
The perception being more important than the facts, and that's politics, isn't it? Amber Rudd writes, McNoodles was responsible for the department that gave her advice. Angela Rayner was a client of the law firm she was relying on, to which I'd respond only by saying, according to Angela Rayner.
Sure.
Which is why we need the investigation.
Exactly, and we haven't seen it. We haven't seen the tax advice. We don't know what she said. I mean, the accusations from the newspapers were that she set up this trust as a way to dodge her tax affairs. She is categorically today rejecting that, saying absolutely not. That was set up years beforehand. So those political attacks from her don't have a base there. But like I say, I think it is more about perception and whether people do believe that she's done the right thing here.
Nice to be back. Natasha Clark, many thanks indeed. I'm talking about PMQs and me and Natasha. We're back. We're all back together. And we've got right through till Christmas now.
Yeah.
Is it?
Apart from
conference season as well.
Conference season, we'll have a few weeks off. October half term, we'll have a week off too.
Holy moly. 12:30. Dominic Ellis, how's your headlines?
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 33 minutes after 12. I didn't do much current affairs while I was on my holidays, but there was one headline that caught my eye. The Cold War defector who saved MI5 and crippled the Kremlin. What do you do for a follow-up? What do you do for a second act? And it was a headline referring to a book by our friend Richard Kerbaj, who is with me now. The book is called The Defector. But a quick word first, Richard, on your last effort, the book about Five Eyes, which you were here to talk to us about. Particularly, I mean, what's changed in that world since we last saw you?
I mean, Trump has returned. That's what's changed in that world. And of course, his return has brought about a great deal of changes within the intelligence community, particularly in the US. So you've got now a system that is far more politically driven and politically directed. You've got department heads. So traditionally in the US, you have agency heads who are appointed by the president. Now you've got departmental heads. You've got dissent being rooted out of the agencies. Anyone who's not aligned politically is being kicked out. I've got a lot of friends of mine who were formerly serving and who are currently serving, who are sort of giving me sort of a pretty fascinating and frightening picture of how it is.
How do you prove loyalty? Now. Do you know? Is that a silly question?
I think, well, how do you prove loyalty? Yeah. By essentially conducting yourself according to the political agenda of the day.
Not according to the code that you signed up to when you became an intelligence officer.
No, because of course you've got many people within the intelligence agencies, whether we're talking about the CIA or the FBI, the sort of the flagships, who are all about independence, are all about impartiality, are all about conducting themselves according to the laws of the land. Yeah, it's exactly right. So essentially, if you can't have dissent, which is what you need within intelligence, then you end up with false intelligence, which is what we had in the lead up to Iraq. And as soon as you have intelligence that is either fabricated or politically motivated, then you can see what happens.
I'm really struggling with the challenge of properly chronicling the scale of what is going on the other side of the Atlantic, because it is so constant and it is so unrelenting. And you can't do it all day, every day. And so whether you're talking about people being snatched from the streets by masked men in the employ of the government, or whether you're talking about senior and highly respected intelligence professionals feeling that they have no place in the agencies anymore because they are not going to do Donald Trump's bidding. They're going to act in the interests of the American people and the American country. How shocked are you? I mean, how do you have these moments as well where you go...
I have these moments almost every day. I speak to people about this. I research this area. I research Five Eyes, which is the spy network that was created after the formation, after the end of the Second World War, and brought on board the US, UK, Canada, New Zealand and Australia. And the whole point of the Five Eyes creation to begin with was to combat the Soviet threat. So if you were to fast forward now from the post-World War II to now, well, it repurposed itself as an alliance. And despite that, the threat from Russia remained constant, and the interpretation of that threat was consistent across the whole board within the alliance. But only now, in the Trump's second term, is there a difference in opinion about whether or not Russia constitutes a threat. And that's fascinating, because that's never happened. Yeah. It's one thing to disagree on policy matters, another thing to disagree on how to approach the Russian threat. We've never been in a place where there's a disagreement between the US and the rest of the Five Eyes about whether or not Russia is a threat. And I think that's largely because we've moved from a relational setup that existed ever since the Second World War to a transactional setup, because Trump is about making deals rather than putting sort of morality first or independence and partiality.
I wonder whether, when you sat down to start writing The Defector, which was presumably a few years ago, that the present seemed less interesting than the past, and now we arrive at the publication of the book, and the present is at least
totally. Yeah, he's made my job so much easier. In fact, the last part of the book, the epilogue, I sort of move into the Putin era, and the reason being is because Oleg Lyalin's defection led to the forced shutdown of Department V, which is a sabotage and assassinations department within the KGB. And that program, the assassinations and sabotage program, was not revived until Putin came back into power in the late 1990s. So I sort of chart his rise to power and then his time. And of course, the first targets they went after were defectors, and the first known targets they went after were Alexander Litvinenko in 2006, who was killed with polonium-210 poisoning, and they went after Sergei Skripal in 2018, and then Alexander Puteyev in 2020. And the mission sort of continues for them.
History repeating.
Yeah.
So I don't know why it bothers me so much, but I always make a point of mentioning Dawn Sturgis at this point when the script.
Completely. In fact, I mentioned her as well, because although the attack against Skripal and his daughter wasn't a success by their idea of success, it certainly led to the tragic death of Dawn Sturgis.
So who was Oleg Lyalin, and why are you only telling his story now?
Well, I tell you what, I'm telling his story now because in the last few years, the US declassified material relating to his case. So his case is still sealed by MI5. But I managed to get information through incidental declassifications from the JFK files, CIA and FBI files, and sort of I was able to sort of paint this fascinating picture of this individual who was really misplaced. He should not have been a KGB officer to begin with. He was a party man, he's a boozer.
Loved to go out and have poppers and booze, not as in the communists.
Yeah, exactly. He wasn't. So he was talented enough to make the Department V program, the sabotage and assassinations program. But as soon as he was deployed to Britain in 1969, he kind of fell into the party scene and would go out and he had multiple love affairs. He was married with a child, but he had about 5 girlfriends on the go. And his life became so chaotic that in early 1971, he approached MI5 through Hampstead Police Station and said, "Can you kick me out of the country?" And MI5 said, "Why?" He said, "Because I want to go back to divorce my wife and be with my girlfriend." And immediately they thought, this guy's either insane or something's not right about him. Maybe he's been sent by the KGB. So when they ran a mission against him, surveillance mission, to try to corroborate all of the intelligence he was providing. And the intelligence he was providing was quite shocking. He told him that the KGB was plotting to kill politicians. It was plotting to attack Britain's seawater with radioactive waste, plotting to go after British medical and military and economic targets, and also exposed all of the KGB operatives who were running undercover in the UK.
Now, I mean, what time is it? 12:40. It should probably build up a little bit of tension. How many Soviet officials were expelled from Britain? Did MI5 manage to purge from Britain as a consequence of his information? How many people would guess that correctly?
105.
Yeah, that's 105. Just incredible, isn't it?
It's insane. I mean, if you look at the expulsions that took place after the Skripal case in 2018, well, in total, there were about 156 from memory, and that's from more than 30 countries.
Yeah.
So by a single country, that is massive. They're basically, and also they had a second order. So Britain then came out, Alec Douglas Hume came out and said, if you retaliate aggressively, we're going to go after more people. Yeah. There were up to about 200 KGB officers operating undercover in Britain, more per capita than in any other Western nation, including the United States.
It's extraordinary. And so were some of the plans that he shared that you've just alluded to. I know that people who write about espionage and the intelligence agencies probably expect the words James Bond to appear at some point in every conversation that they ever have. But you're talking about contaminating seawater, destroying railway systems, sabotaging emergency food supplies, getting radioactive waste into the waters, all that kind of thing. Remind us why this was of such value to MI5, because the subtitle of the book, The Defector, is the man who saved MI5. It was on its knees in the early 70s.
Completely. So the 1960s, of course, you had MI5 struggling to deal with the defections to the other side. So we had Burgess and McLean in 1950, 10 years on, or 14 years on, 13 years on. You had Philby who defected, but also there was there was a great deal of insecurity about how to deal with the Soviet threat. And I think it was completely misrepresented in their head. It was exaggerated. And that was largely because of the information that MI5 was getting from the CIA. And that information was completely flawed because the CIA was convinced that there was a deception program that had been created by the KGB called the Master Plan, and that was in place to train people on how to become defectors. So, of course, anyone who was approaching the West as a defector was considered to be a suspect.
It's a double agent.
As a double, completely. So, but in addition to that, the CIA convinced MI5 that Harold Wilson was a spy, convinced MI5 that the Roger Hollis was a spy, the head of MI5, and the deputy head of MI5, Graham Mitchell, was a spy as well. Now, thankfully, MI5 ran a series of investigations to all those claims and discredited those claims by 1971. So when Oleg Lialin approached MI5, they thought, what if we withhold information from our buddies at the CIA, because they're quite they're quite flimsy with their insights. And so they did. And that was the first time during the Cold War that Britain took that step to withhold information in the interest of national security instead of furthering its closeness, within the special relationship.
Just extraordinary.
And so now fast forward 54 years, and I think something like that is very likely to be happening, because we know for certain that, for instance, intelligence exchanges on counterterrorism are happening. If there's a counterterrorism threat, you will provide the information to the US and vice versa. But on threats relating to Russia, I believe, and I understand based on conversations that I've had, that there is withholding of information. Now, you could say that withholding is legitimate because within the Five Eyes you have a categorization that allows for the withholding of intelligence. But I think we're potentially going to see more and more of it because of the contaminated thinking in the US at the moment about the Russian
threat. I
threat.
like that phrase, contaminated thinking, and nothing's off the table. I mean, to be simplistic about things, if Donald Trump became party to information, many people would consider it feasible that he'd just tell Vladimir Putin.
Or just put it up online. Exactly, which is why the big joke right now within the Five Eyes is that they should change the name from Five Eyes to Six Eyes, because the Russians are probably going to have a lot of the information.
How
anyway.
funny. Because you just thought Four Eyes, actually, to get America out of the room, but that's not ever going to happen.
Well, the Americans have got so much power and status and reach. I mean, the US intelligence budget alone is about $100 billion plus, which is about 20 times the size of the British intelligence budget, which is about 500 times the size of the New Zealand budget. So there's a complete imbalance in the power structures. But
it's out now, The Defector?
It's out tomorrow. In fact, it's out tomorrow.
A beautiful book. I sound like Donald Trump now.
It
looks and reads like a novel, doesn't it? I mean, but it is.
I'm going to take that and put it as an endorsement on the Amazon website.
You're welcome to, and it's not just Tom Holland from The Rest Is History.
Yeah,
Gordon Carrera, of course, the security correspondent at the BBC. Robert Vercake, who wrote The Traitor of Colditz. All queuing up to lavish praise upon your latest book, as indeed they did for your last book, The History of Five Eyes, The Secret History of Five Eyes. A single thing that you were most surprised to discover, the thing that...
I tell you what, I discovered... So I found a woman who was... This woman who worked with Lee Arlen. She was 19 or 20 at the time. She was a receptionist, a British woman, comes out and tells her story to ITV. She says, I knew him. I had no idea he was a spy. And I thought, I wonder if I could track this woman down. Because by my odd calculations, I figured, okay, 54 years on or whatever, she must be sort of in her 70s. Took me a little while, tracked her down. And she told me this wonderful story about him and about her friendship. And so I was able to use primary sources from the archives, but also go to her and corroborate just personal quirks and traits about him. And so she was wonderful. Susan Woodthorpe is her name. And so she was one of my greatest discoveries.
Buy the book to find out the stories. That was lovely. Thank you. Richard Kerbaj, The Defector, as we say, it will be out now, but officially published tomorrow. Roddy's been in touch. He said, what a compelling and fascinating conversation. You can take the credit for that. It's 12:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:49. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've got another book to recommend to you shortly with our friend Phillips O'Brien has written. But before that, I received quite a few messages since I have been on air about one of my favourite shops, as it happens. Certainly one of my daughter's favourite shops. I speak of Lush, the cosmetics giant, and the messages I've been receiving have essentially said, can you find out what's going on at Lush? Well, here is the head honcho from Lush, Mark Constantine, to tell us exactly what is going on at Lush today. Mark, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Yes, we've closed our shops and our websites and our factories today in solidarity with Gaza.
Stop starving Gaza is the message that comes up on the website. But manufacturing has been halted and retail has shut up shop as well. Tell me. I know why you're expressing solidarity with Gaza, but why?
It's not just. It's just frustration as much as anything else. You can't help in any way if Israel's blocking all the ways in. You sort of mean there's nothing we can do to help, and that becomes more and more frustrating every day. And we know that many of our customers are very keen to see something happen. I know we're just a soap shop, but do you know what I mean?
You're much more than that.
Well, something has to give, doesn't it? And we would like to point out, especially to our government and to everyone else, that we're expecting them to do something.
I can't remember a comparable exercise from a sort of organisation as big as yours. Was it your own personal idea, or
no, I wouldn't be allowed.
No.
Do I support it completely? Absolutely. Am I keen? Yes. But no, we've had people dream up windows like this without permission and put them in our shops, for example, in Canada.
Yes.
We've had little notices written, and shoved in our windows in Dublin. It's an issue that everyone here feels so strongly about. And it's not surprising. I think everyone who's paying attention, you cannot ignore it.
It's always had a very well-established and prominent social conscience, your company. I know that the watermelon slice has been the most successful fundraising product in the history of the company, and that is designed to raise funds towards child mental health support in Gaza. Do you have, and maybe you don't want to tell me even if you do you have any idea how big a financial hit you're going to take as a consequence of doing this?
Yeah, around 300,000.
And that you feel is a price worth paying to draw attention?
Well, it would be good to be able to pay pay for food to go into Gaza, wouldn't it? Rather than just sacrifice it. We have debated so many different things that we could do or might do, and this was in the end that it was just this is what we're doing. And of course, it means that the UK government is deprived of the tax take on that £300,000. 20% of that would. Well, 20% plus 20%, the 300k is the basic.
Would have made its way to the Treasury. Well, thank you for your time.
I don't think they care, though, do you?
Well, I'll ask him next time I see him, and so can you. I wanted to squeeze you in. I've got to take another guest before 1 o'clock mark, so I'm gonna call time on it. But I wanted to draw attention to this largely because so many of my listeners wanted me to. So thank you so much for finding time to talk to us today. Mark Constantine, as I say, the founder of Lush, which is today shutting up shop up and down the country in solidarity with the current situation, the people in Gaza. Phillips O'Brien is waiting patiently to tell us about his new book, which is, well, you tell us, Phillips.
Well, thanks for having me, James. It comes out of things that sort of we've talked about on the show the last few years. It came out of frustration at the inability of people to understand basic power, how strong Russia was, how strong Ukraine was, and how the war between them would develop. That people were talking about Russia as this great power that would steamroller Ukraine in a few days, 3 days. Remember, Kyiv would fall in 3 days, and Ukraine was some weak power that had no chance. And it just seemed there was such a flawed understanding of what makes a country powerful. And I would say two of them much of a military understanding. How many tanks does it have? How many aircraft does it have? That's what makes a country powerful. It's outward military forces. That I wanted to say that, that's just putting, I was going to say ass backwards. I don't know if I can say that.
Well, you have now.
Sorry. But basically, it's not looking at what military power is, which is a product. It's a product of a society, of a political system, of a leadership, of an economy. And that we need a far more substantial understanding of power. And then once we have that, you can have a better understanding of what matters in a war. It's not some boys' war game.
I mean, what's extraordinary about it, I suppose, and the title of the book, War and Power, Who Wins Wars and Why, certainly passes the Ronseal test, doesn't it? It does exactly what it says on the tin, is that this misconception or this failure to understand was not confined to your world. It wasn't confined to, academia or commentary. In many ways, Vladimir Putin himself was a victim of the misconception.
The people with access to the quote-unquote best intelligence in the world got this wrong. The chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Pentagon senior officer, supposedly went to Congress a few weeks before the invasion and said Kyiv would fall in a week, within a week. He has all U.S. intelligence resources. Putin believed that, clearly believed the Ukrainians wouldn't fight. But that means there's a systemic problem, James, that people just don't know how to judge these ideas.
When did it start? When did the sort of oil tanker start turning around and the old truths, the old metrics for measuring these sort of things began to change?
Well, that's a really perceptive point, because in many ways we're getting worse.
Right.
As we get more think tanks and more intelligence communities, more spies, more analysts, we're actually making more mistakes. Early in the 20th century, when there wasn't all this paraphernalia of intelligence and analysis, people would say, well, I don't know. It might be this, it might be that. These are the things to consider. Whereas now, maybe it's so important to say, well, I have all this great intelligence, this is what will happen. And really, unfortunately, they were all caught out. So we've gotten worse, I would say, in understanding war and power than we were 100 years ago.
We were talking earlier in a completely different context about how unfashionable thoughtful uncertainty has become in recent years. And you're making exactly the same point, I think.
It's entirely right. And in a town like Washington and in a town like London, it's so important to be the smartest person. right? In fact, intelligence is in many ways a currency. And those who are considered smart and make themselves seem to be smart have a higher value. Therefore, you want to sound really smart. You want to sound clever. But the problem is, mostly you're being clever about things that'll never happen, and that's fine.
Sure.
But now you were caught being clever on something you didn't know what you were talking about.
I'm hearing the word plausible. People who are plausible, but not necessarily authentic or as informed as they like to portray. What happens next, Phillips? I mean, I don't want to sort of get a full précis of the book, but where does it leave us?
Well, I mean, the book ends. The last part of the book is what happens if U.S. and China go to war. And it was trying to say that not only would it be horrible, and it would be horrible in a way that would dwarf Russia or Ukraine. It's that people can't make the same mistakes in thinking this would be a short war. Quick war, let's fight over Taiwan, we'll know in a few weeks what's going to happen. The sort of Kyiv will fall in a week analysis. If the U.S. and China go to war, it could be a long, destructive war, unlike anything we've seen since the Second World War. And it's also one where the United States would have massive problems.
And on that happy note, thank you for your time. Phillips Payson O'Brien, to give you your full name, whose new book, War and Power, Who Wins Wars and Why, is published this week. In fact, I mean, they'd both enjoy each other's book, wouldn't they? Phillips would enjoy Richard's book, and Richard would enjoy Phillips's book. And you can, of course, enjoy both of them, because that is it from me for another day. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, or indeed on the LBC app, where you can stay up to date on all the top stories and opinions. You can put your news categories in the order you want. You can pause and rewind live radio and listen to a dizzying range of podcasts, including all the ones I've referenced today. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Join Tom Swarbrick on LBC at 4. But now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
Can I apologise for that blast of music I brought in with me?
I was going to pretend it.
No, I was actually trying to put the volume down on my phone, and I put the volume up
Happy
on
days.
my phone.
It comes to us all.
James O'Brien on LBC.